Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.X Files. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Alright, let's get into it. Jason Hart never thought his government job would make him fear for his life. At 37, he had spent nearly a decade as a data analyst for a classified branch of the Department of Justice. His work was predictable, monotonous even, reviewing old case files, compiling statistics, ensuring classified information remained just that. He liked the stability. He liked the quiet. He wasn't the kind of man to chase after hidden truths. But that changed on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. His office was a windowless cubicle in a secure building just outside Washington, D.C. The walls were a lifeless grey, the lighting harsh, and the coffee perpetually stale. On this particular day, he was working through a backlog of old CIA and FBI case files marked for internal review. Most were routine, redacted memos about long-closed investigations, bureaucratic chatter, Cold War paranoia, the kind of thing that lulled him into a near meditative state as he scrolled through page after page. The chair beneath him groaned as he shifted his weight, trying to find a comfortable position. The fabric had long since given up the fight, compressed to the point of offering no support. The soft hum of his monitor blended with the muted clatter of keyboards in the surrounding cubicles. No one spoke louder than necessary. In this line of work, discretion wasn't just expected. It was mandatory. Jason's desk was as unremarkable as the office itself. A stack of neatly organized file folders occupied one corner. A coffee-stained mug filled with an assortment of pens on the other. A framed photo of his younger self with his parents sat beside his monitor. A quiet reminder of a past life that felt light years away. The only thing resembling personality in his workspace was a small, earth-shaped stress ball, which he squeezed, absent-mindedly as he worked. He was methodical, skimming through each file with practiced efficiency. Each document was a glimpse into the past, though most offered little more than bureaucratic noise. Records of mundane investigations, outdated security protocols, procedural memos long since rendered obsolete. Still, he paid attention. It was, in his nature, he had a knack for spotting anomalies, tiny inconsistencies that disrupted the neat order he preferred. And then, something caught his eye. A single document buried within a dull stack of records. It was a brief memorandum, seemingly unremarkable at first glance. But as he read, a chill prickled at the back of his neck. The subject line, "For immediate redaction, executive directive." His heart kicked up a notch as he scanned the contents. The memo referenced a case number he didn't recognize, something not included in the official archives. That alone was odd. He frowned, leaning closer to the screen. The details were sparse, almost deliberately vague, but one phrase stood out, sending a slow, creeping unease through his veins. Evidence to be secured permanently. No external review. All inquiries to be deferred indefinitely. Jason swallowed, his fingers tightening around the stress ball in his hand. His mind raced. What the hell was this? The memo was dated months after the Kennedy assassination, signed by a high-ranking official whose name was conspicuously absent from any other files he had access to. The language was careful, meticulous, crafted to say everything and nothing. At once, a cover-up, the thought landed with a weight he wasn't prepared for. His rational side urged him to dismiss it. Maybe it was just an unrelated case, a clerical error, a misfiled document from another investigation. But deep down, he knew better. He knew how these things were handled, how real secrets were buried, hidden beneath layers of official jargon and bureaucratic misdirection. His mouth felt dry. He glanced at the clock. The second hand ticked steadily toward lunchtime, but time suddenly felt irrelevant. His gaze drifted to his coffee mug, its contents, now a lukewarm sludge. He lifted it to his lips, more out of habit than thirst, wincing at the bitterness. His mind buzzed with questions, but one thought overpowered all the rest. Had someone already noticed what he had just seen? Back at his screen, Jason noticed a folder he hadn't seen before. That wasn't entirely unusual. Files sometimes appeared, out of nowhere when supervisors dumped new tasks on analysts without warning. But something about this one made him pause. The title, Confidential, Special Review. Most of the files he worked with followed strict naming conventions, dates, project numbers, agency acronyms. This one was vague, too vague. His cursor hovered over the folder icon as a faint unease stirred in his gut. He scanned the office. No one was paying attention. His co-workers were locked into their own work, oblivious to his hesitation. With a small shrug, he double-clicked. Inside, the folder was almost empty. Just a handful of documents, with nondescript titles. Jason clicked the first one, a scanned memo dated decades ago. The typewritten text was slightly blurred, the edges of the paper faintly yellowed, like something pulled from a long-forgotten archive. At first glance, it seemed routine, a high-priority operation involving multiple agencies. But the tone was off. It lacked the usual bureaucratic detachment. The language was blunt, almost casual, rare for official communication. Jason frowned, leaning closer. Mentions of directives from the highest level and sensitive outcomes requiring absolute discretion stood out. His fingers curled around the stress ball on his desk, squeezing absent-mindedly. This didn't feel like just another relic of cold, war paranoia. Curiosity gnawed at him. He clicked on the next document, his heart beating a little faster. The file loaded slowly, and for a split second, he had the irrational thought that someone might be watching him. He shook it off. Get a grip, man. The new document's title made his stomach drop. Top Secret, Operation Patriot. That name meant nothing to him, but the subheading did. Dallas Contingency Planning, November 1963. A chill crawled up his spine. JFK Jason had always been fascinated by the assassination. He didn't buy into the crazier conspiracy theories, but something about it never sat right. And yet, here was a classified file buried deep in the system, suggesting there was more to the story. He started reading. The first few pages were standard: logistics, security details, travel plans, memos on routes and crowd control. But then, the tone shifted. His breath caught as he scanned a memo from a high-ranking official. Absolute control over the narrative in the event of a Dallas incident. Dallas incident. Not assassination. Not attack. Incident. His hands felt clammy against the keyboard. The document referenced individuals only by codenames and included chilling. Phrases like plausible deniability and coordinated disinformation efforts. Jason's throat went dry. His eyes darted toward the office entrance, half expecting someone to be standing there. But the room remained the same. Colleagues typing, printers humming, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. He turned back to the screen. Pulse, hammering. His clearance gave him access to these files, but understanding them, that was another matter entirely. He hesitated for a moment. Then, almost against his better judgment, he clicked on the next document. It was worse. A transcript. A conversation between two officials. One labeled director, the other simply operations. Are the assets in place? Yes. Dallas is secured. The fall guy is ready. Good. This has to look clean. No loose ends. Jason's stomach twisted. The fall guy. They were talking about Lee Harvey Oswald. Jason wasn't supposed to see this. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry as his eyes darted over the damning text. Altered ballistics reports. Witnesses removed. Plans to strong-arm local law enforcement into silence. This wasn't some half-baked conspiracy theory. This was a blueprint for covering up a murder. His pulse hammered against his ribs as he leaned back in his chair, the office suddenly feeling too small, too quiet. The hum of the computers, the occasional rustle of papers, background noise that once felt routine now sent prickles of paranoia down his spine. Any second now, someone would step through the door, a firm hand clamping down on his shoulder. "Get a grip." Jason took a shaky breath, forcing himself to think. This had to be a mistake, a joke, some kind of disinformation. But the official seals, the signatures, the meticulous timestamps, they were too perfect, too real. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He should report this, flag it, and move on. But instead, he clicked on another document, a scanned, handwritten note. The penmanship was neat, clinical. Ensure ZR-104 is neutralized before the press gets wind of his testimony. The autopsy report is to remain classified indefinitely. Jason's blood ran cold. ZR-104. He'd seen that code before, whispered in online, conspiracy forums, and off-the-record conversations. A key witness, one who died under mysterious circumstances. His hands trembled as he plugged in a flash drive, saving everything before he could talk himself out of it. Maybe it was just for later review. Maybe he wasn't actually doing anything wrong. But deep down, he knew better. That night, sleep didn't come. He lay in his tiny apartment, the flash drive pressed under his pillow like a talisman. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the low hum of the refrigerator, felt amplified, sinister. The streetlight outside cast jagged shadows through his blinds, shapes that seemed to shift and breathe with his paranoia. What the hell was he supposed to do? He had no allies, no one to turn to. Even if he went public, who would believe him? He'd heard the stories, bureaucrats and journalists who'd pushed too far, asked too many questions, transferred, silenced, erased. It had all seemed like paranoia before. Now it felt like a warning. A new fear curled around his gut, different from the abstract dread that had been gnawing at him. This was immediate, tangible. His heartbeat lurched as he sat up, throwing the blanket aside. He moved to the window, lifting a slat of the blinds just enough to peek outside. The street was still. A few cars trundled by, their headlights sweeping shadows across the pavement. Nothing unusual, except a black sedan parked across the street. The engine was off, but a faint glow inside illuminated a figure sitting behind the wheel. Jason's stomach clenched. He tried to reason with himself. A neighbor, someone waiting for a friend, just a coincidence. But his gut told him otherwise. He let the blinds slip shut and backed away, heart thudding against his ribs. His apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap, too small, too exposed. He sat on the edge of his bed, fingers pressing against his temples, trying to think. He couldn't live like this, flinching at every shadow, second-guessing every sound. But he also couldn't ignore the weight of the flash drive under his pillow, because he knew, with sickening certainty, that the moment he turned it over, there was no going back. Jason's grip tightened around the flash drive in his pocket, its edges pressing into his palm like a cruel reminder. He couldn't go to the authorities, not when the documents he'd seen implicated people at the highest levels. Who could he even trust? And if he went public, if he made the wrong move, he'd be painting a target on his back. The minutes stretched into hours. Dawn seeped through the slats of his blinds, painting the room in pale, ghostly light. His body ached with exhaustion, but sleep was out of the question. Every creak in the building felt like footsteps, every distant sound like a whispered threat. He clutched the flash drive tighter. It was the only thing tethering him to reality now. One thing was clear: he couldn't stay here. By morning, Jason's unease had calcified into something heavier: dread. As he approached his office building, his stomach knotted at the sight of a black SUV parked near the entrance. The windows were tinted so dark they were nearly a mirror, reflecting the cold morning sky. Two men stood nearby, suits crisp, postures rigid, scanning the area like hawks. Jason faltered mid-step, his pulse spiking. It could be a coincidence, another agency, unrelated business. But as he reached for his ID badge, swiping it at the security gate, one of the men turned his head. Just slightly, just enough. Their eyes met. The look wasn't casual. It was calculated. Jason swallowed hard, forcing himself to move. Inside, the office felt wrong. The usual hum of conversations and clicking keyboards had dulled. People who normally greeted him barely glanced his way, their voices hushed, their expressions guarded. He felt like a spotlight had been placed on him, invisible but burning. Had someone already tipped them off? He moved to his desk, willing himself to appear normal. Keep your head down. Don't panic. Don't ding. An email notification. No sender. No subject. The message was chilling in its simplicity. We know everything. Jason's breath hitched. His hand hovered over the mouse, unsure whether to delete it, open it, or pretend it didn't exist. His gaze flicked to his bag, where the flash drive lay hidden beneath meaningless paperwork. How? He had been careful. Had someone been watching him before he even realized he was being watched? Had there been cameras in his apartment? Bugs. A shiver crawled up his spine. His instincts screamed, "Get out!" Jason stood so fast his chair nearly toppled over. He grabbed his bag, forced a deep breath, and strode toward the exit as calmly as he could manage. But every step felt heavier, like wading through deep water. The elevator ride down stretched unbearably long. Each ding marked another opportunity for someone to step in, to stop him. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe. Act normal. When the doors finally slid open on the ground floor, he stepped out and walked, brisk but not panicked, toward the main entrance. Then he saw it. The black SUV was still there, idling, waiting. One of the men turned toward him, tall, broad shoulders, dark sunglasses, a comms device clipped to his lapel. Their eyes locked for the briefest second, before the man turned, muttering something low into his mic. Jason didn't wait to find out what he was saying. He bolted, shoving past early commuters. He wove through the crowd, heart hammering, lungs burning, a glance over his shoulder. They were following, not running, just walking, steady, measured, like hunters who already knew their prey had nowhere to go. Jason veered sharply into an alley. Think. He fumbled with his phone, dialing the only person who might help. Mark, an old friend, investigative journalist, someone who still believed in exposing the truth. The line rang, once, twice, 3 times. Then, voicemail. Jason cursed under his breath. Jason's fingers shook as he left the message. Mark, it's Jason. I can't explain everything right now, but I have something big, huge. I'm being followed. I need your help. Call me as soon as you get this. He ended the call, his breath ragged. Then, footsteps. Not hurried, not panicked, measured, controlled. Jason bolted, darting through side streets, slipping into crowds. He kept moving, never looking back for too long. The chase stretched for hours. Every time he thought he'd lost them, the men in suits reappeared, always just close enough to remind him they weren't done yet. By nightfall, Jason found himself holed up in a rundown motel on the city's outskirts. The air smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap disinfectant. The walls were thin, every sound from the neighboring rooms creeping through like ghosts. He sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the flash drive so tightly, his fingers ached. It felt heavier now, as if the weight of its secrets had turned solid. He couldn't keep running forever. He had to do something. Jason yanked his laptop from his bag, booting it up with shaking hands. The motel's Wi-Fi was painfully slow, but he didn't have time to be frustrated. He opened an encrypted email service and began typing, attaching files one by one. He sent them everywhere: journalists, whistleblower organizations, trusted contacts. With each email sent, he felt both victory and inevitability. Someone would see the truth, but they would see him too. When the last email left his outbox, Jason leaned back, exhaling a breath that carried days of tension. For the first time, he felt a flicker of relief. It lasted mere seconds. A faint hum reached his ears. A car engine. Growing louder, Jason's stomach twisted. He turned to the window, peeling the curtain back just an inch. Under the flickering glow of a streetlight, it sat. The black SUV, waiting. The engine idled, its presence a quiet, unspoken warning. His time was up. Jason snapped his laptop shut, shoving it into his bag alongside the now empty flash drive. He had to move. Now! He grabbed his belongings, reached for the door. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of steps made by people who already knew they had won. Jason's breath hitched. He backed away from the door, his pulse hammering in his ears. His eyes darted around the room, searching for another way out. There wasn't one. A soft knock. Almost polite. "Mr. Hart," a voice called from the other side. Calm, even friendly. But there was an edge beneath it, a quiet menace. "We just want to talk." Jason stayed silent. His mind raced. Surrender or fight for whatever slim chance remained? Another knock, firmer this time. "Open the door, Mr. Hart. You've made things very complicated for yourself." Jason swallowed hard, pressing himself against the far wall. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The silence stretched, suffocating. Then, a crash. The door splintered. Inward. A silhouette filled the doorway, towering and shadowed. A glint of metal. Jason's world went dark. Evelyn Harper never thought of herself as special. She lived in the kind of town where people knew each other's names, where the biggest news of the week was whether old Mr. Grayson's cow had wandered off again. Tucked away on the edge of the Midwest, it was the sort of place where the stars stretched wide and bright, almost close enough to touch. By day, she was a third-grade teacher, patient and steady, guiding young minds through spelling tests and art projects. By night, she was alone, and she liked it that way. No obligations beyond the routine she had carefully built. She often joked that her most faithful companions were the books stacked by her bedside and the crickets that chirped outside her window. Her days followed a rhythm as comforting as the ticking of an old clock. Mornings meant waking to the birdsong filtering through her open window, the scent of damp earth drifting in from the fields. She'd wrap her hands around her favorite mug, the blue ceramic one with the chip on the rim, and sip her coffee as she worked through the daily crossword in the town's only newspaper. By the time she'd finished, the sun would be climbing, turning the fields into a sea of gold stretching to the horizon. Teaching wasn't always easy, but she loved it. The noise, the laughter, the endless energy of children. It made the world feel lighter. She had a knack for storytelling, slipping bits of magic into the most ordinary lessons. "Spelling is just like casting spells," she'd say, winking at her students. "You have to get the letters in exactly the right order, or who knows what might happen." They'd giggle, wide-eyed, and suddenly, memorizing words didn't seem so dull. After school, she lingered in the quiet of her classroom, wiping the chalk, dust from her hands, straightening desks, preparing for another day. The silence wasn't loneliness. It was peace. Her evenings belonged to herself. A simple dinner, often from the vegetables in her small garden, eaten by the dim glow of the kitchen light. Then a book, a journal, sometimes just sitting on the porch, listening to the wind stir the fields. Dusk was her favorite time, when the sky melted into shades of lavender and peach, and the first stars flickered awake. She'd cradle a cup of tea and let the stillness settle over her, the cricket's chorus weaving through the night. To anyone else, her life might have seemed uneventful, even dull, but to Evelyn, it was perfect, predictable, safe. She didn't need adventure. She didn't want it. And yet, some nights, when the world was especially quiet, A strange restlessness crept in. She'd catch herself staring at the stars a little, too long, feeling the weight of something she couldn't name pressing at the edges of her contentment. A whisper in the back of her mind, a question with no words. She never expected her life to change, not in any dramatic way, but the universe doesn't ask permission before it shifts. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers, the heat of the day still lingering in the soil. Evelyn had settled onto her porch with her tea, letting the familiar peace of the night wrap around her. But tonight, the quiet was different. Not peaceful. Too still. Like the world was holding its breath. She frowned, shifting in her chair, her gaze lifting to the sky. The stars were unusually bright, scattered across the darkness like shards of glass. The moon hung low, casting a pale glow over the fields. And then, a flicker, a ripple in the sky. It was so subtle she might have imagined it, but something deep in her chest told her she hadn't. A strange sensation curled in her stomach, a slow, creeping unease. She set her mug down on the wooden railing, rising to her feet. Stepping off the porch, she let the grass cool against her bare feet as she tilted her head back. The stars were still, silent, watching, and then, just for a second, one of them moved. Not a shooting star, not a plane, something else, something impossible. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The night stretched wide around her, full of questions she wasn't ready to answer. And for the first time in her carefully ordered life, she was afraid. Evelyn sipped her tea slowly, letting the warmth spread through her chest as she listened to the crickets' steady song. Their rhythmic chirping had always been a comfort, a familiar melody that filled the otherwise quiet nights. Then, without warning, they stopped. Not gradually. One moment, their symphony filled the air, weaving through the breeze like a lullaby. The next, nothing. A deep, suffocating silence settled over the night, thick and unnatural, pressing down on her like a weight. Evelyn froze, her cup poised halfway to her lips. A prickle of unease crawled up the back of her neck. She swallowed hard, her gaze snapping toward the edge of the field, searching for the source of the disruption. It wasn't uncommon for the crickets to fall silent when a predator lurked nearby. A fox, maybe, or a stray cat slinking through the tall grass. But this was different. The quiet stretched too long, too heavy. Setting her tea down with unsteady hands, Evelyn leaned forward, gripping the armrests of her chair. Her breath slowed. Her pulse quickened. The wind had stilled. The trees stood motionless, their branches frozen mid-sway. Even the grass, which usually whispered with the night's gentle breeze, lay eerily still. The world felt wrong. A chill licked up her spine. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable under the vast open sky. Then she saw it, a faint light hovering just above the field. At first, it was no bigger than a lantern glow, soft and flickering. She blinked, unsure if her tired eyes were playing tricks on her. But the light remained, unwavering, steady. It cast an eerie glow across the grass, shifting like fireflies in the dark. A plane? No. It moved, too erratically, darting back and forth with an unnatural precision that sent a shiver through her bones. The glow pulsed, shifting between hues of blue, green, and white, as if it were alive, breathing, watching. Evelyn's breath hitched. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she pushed herself to her feet, her hands gripping the porch railing for support. She couldn't tear her eyes away. It was mesmerizing. It was terrifying. Her mind scrambled for an explanation. A drone, some kind of experimental aircraft, a trick of the atmosphere. But deep down, she knew. This wasn't man-made. The light pulsed brighter, its glow spilling across the field, illuminating the tall grass in an otherworldly radiance. The shadows stretched in strange, unnatural shapes. Evelyn took a step back, her heartbeat slamming against her ribs. Then she heard it, a sound, low, deep, and resonant, a hum that didn't just fill the air, but seemed to vibrate through her, sinking into her bones. The atmosphere felt charged, the air around her humming with an unseen force. The world felt alive, holding its breath with her. And then the light vanished, just like that. Darkness swallowed the field. The stars, once brilliant, seemed impossibly dim in its absence. Evelyn stood motionless, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. The silence stretched on, so absolute it made her skin crawl. She strained her ears, waiting, hoping for the crickets to resume their song. But they didn't. Her legs felt weak. She stumbled back toward the door, her hands fumbling for the knob. As soon as she was inside, she locked it behind her, as if that thin wooden barrier could protect her from whatever she had just seen. The familiar hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the old clock on the wall. These were the sounds of her normal life. But they did nothing to calm the racing of her thoughts. Evelyn paced the small living room, rubbing her arms, trying to convince herself she had imagined it, a trick of the light, a weather phenomenon, an overactive imagination stirred by too many quiet nights alone. But the image of the light was burned into her mind, vivid and unrelenting. She checked the windows, once, twice, 3 times, peering out into the darkness, waiting, listening, dreading. The house made her jump, her pulse quickening as shadows flickered at the edges of her vision. She thought about calling someone, her sister maybe, or a colleague from school. But what would she even say? How could she explain what she had seen without sounding like she had lost her mind? Evelyn spent the rest of the night wide awake, the warm glow of a single lamp her only comfort. She tried to read, flipping through the familiar pages of her favorite book, but the words blurred together. Her mind was elsewhere, stuck replaying the scene over and over, searching for an explanation. That made sense, but no matter how she tried to rationalize it, one thought lingered, refusing to be ignored. It was something more. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the fields in shades of gold and amber, Evelyn finally allowed herself to breathe. Just for a moment, the world looked ordinary again. The cricket's song returned. The wind rustled through the wheat, as if nothing had happened. But she knew better. What she had seen the night before wasn't ordinary, and deep down, she suspected this was only the beginning. The next morning, Evelyn felt like a ghost. She went through the motions, teaching her 3rd grade class, chatting with colleagues in the break room, but her mind was elsewhere. A weight sat in her chest, an uneasy feeling she couldn't shake. Something had watched her last night. She was sure of it. And whatever had hovered above her field wasn't finished. When she returned home that evening, the unease only grew. She checked the locks on her doors and windows twice, her eyes darting to the field every few minutes. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange, but Evelyn found no beauty in it. She sat by the window, clutching her mug of tea like a lifeline, and waited. It happened again. Around midnight, the light returned. This time, it was brighter, its movements more erratic. Evelyn's hands trembled as she grabbed her phone, determined to record it. But just as she pressed the button, an overwhelming exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Her vision blurred. Her limbs felt impossibly heavy. The last thing she remembered was collapsing onto the couch. Morning. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting warm patterns on the hardwood floor. Evelyn blinked groggily, her body aching like she had run miles in her sleep. For a brief second, she thought it had all been a dream. Then she saw her feet, bare, caked in dirt. Her breath hitched as she sat up, inspecting herself. Faint scratches ran along her arms, as if she had walked through the field. But how? She had no memory of leaving the house. Her stomach twisted. Maybe she was sleepwalking. Maybe it was stress or exhaustion. But deep down, she knew better. The marks on her arms were too precise, too deliberate. She avoided looking at the field that day, avoided thinking about the light. But it wouldn't let her forget. Over the following weeks, the experiences escalated. At first, it was subtle. The lights in the sky appeared more frequently, hovering in the distance. Their glow faint but unmistakable. They lingered longer now, as if waiting, watching. Evelyn would stand by the window, heart pounding, telling herself it was nothing, that she had nothing to fear. But the lights grew bolder. They came closer, illuminating the fields with an unnatural intensity, turning the familiar landscape into something unrecognizable. Their brightness seeped through her curtains, spilling into her home like an unwelcome presence. Then there were the marks. She noticed the first one on a cool morning, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, a small, perfect circle just below her collarbone. It didn't hurt, but its precision unsettled her. Over the following nights, more appeared. On her arms, her legs, even the back of her neck. Always the same, small, round, too symmetrical to be accidental. Evelyn tried to rationalize them. Maybe she had bumped into something. Maybe it was a weird reaction to a bug bite. But the excuses never held up. The marks were too deliberate, too intentional. Then came the sound. It started in the dead of night. A low, humming vibration, deep and resonant, thrumming beneath her skin like it was inside her, not just around her. It didn't come from the house. It came from the field. The sound would rise and fall, rhythmic, almost like a pulse, almost like a voice. Evelyn barely slept anymore. When she closed her eyes, she saw the light. She felt the hum in her bones. Something had found her, and it wasn't going away. The humming started as a whisper, so faint that Evelyn thought she was imagining it. But with each passing night, it grew louder, more insistent. It didn't come from outside, nor was it a sound the house should be making. It emanated from everywhere and nowhere at once, vibrating through the walls, the floor, even inside her own body. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence. The sensation settled deep in her chest, an unshakable pressure that made her stomach twist. She tried to ignore it, burying her head beneath her pillow, but the sound followed, pressing against her senses, tightening around her ribs until pretending was no longer an option. Her home, once a place of solace, had turned against her. Every shadow felt sinister, every creak a warning. Even the crickets, whose nighttime chorus had always been familiar, now sounded distorted, like a warped echo of something watching, waiting. And then came the silence, that suffocating, unnatural stillness after the lights appeared, as if the world outside had simply stopped existing. She stopped stepping onto the porch at night, too afraid of what might be staring back from the field. But even inside, behind locked doors and drawn curtains, she wasn't safe. The walls no longer felt like a barrier. If anything, they felt thin. One particularly cold night, Evelyn curled up on the couch, her hands gripping a flashlight she had started carrying everywhere. A small, useless comfort against the growing dread that clawed at her sanity. She hadn't slept in days. Her nerves were too raw, her body too tense. The cup of tea on her coffee table had gone cold, its steam long since dissipated. And then, the humming started again. It was faint at first, just a low vibration beneath her skin. But, as the seconds ticked by, it grew stronger. The very air around her seemed to thrum with it, pressing against her skull, her chest, her bones. Then the light came. At first, just a soft glow in the distance. But this time, it didn't stay outside. The glow intensified, slipping through the cracks beneath the door, seeping around the edges of the curtains until it filled the entire room. It wasn't just light. It was something more, something alive. It cast eerie, elongated shadows across the walls, but they didn't match the furniture. They didn't match her. Evelyn's breath hitched. Something moved. Figures, faint and spectral, flickered at the edges of her vision, like they had always been there, just waiting. They were tall, too tall. Their limbs were impossibly long, their movements slow, deliberate, unnatural. They drifted forward in unison, their forms pulsing with the light, their faces obscured. She couldn't tell if they were looking at her, but she felt their gaze, heavy, suffocating. A part of her screamed to run, to move, to do something, but her body refused. The air around her was thick, pressing down, rooting her in place. Her fingers slackened, the flashlight slipping from her grasp and rolling onto the floor. She barely registered the dull thud it made. Her pulse roared in her ears, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The figures drew closer, their edges sharpening, growing clearer. Then, the humming surged, a deep, resonant vibration that rattled her very bones. The light pulsed, brighter and brighter, until it swallowed everything, turning the room into a blinding, endless white. Tears streamed down her face, her vision swam, and then nothing. When Evelyn woke, she was on the couch. The flashlight lay beside her, cold against the floor. The light was gone. The humming was a distant memory. But the silence that remained, that was worse. Here's the rewritten version of your story. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The silence pressed against Evelyn's ears, thick and unnatural. Her body ached, her limbs heavy as though she had been running for miles. She reached up to rub the soreness in her neck and froze. A mark, smooth, cold, precise, as if it had been etched into her skin. Her breath hitched. She scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over her own feet as she stumbled toward the mirror. The dim light of the room cast sharp shadows across her face, her wide eyes scanning her reflection, searching. There it was, just below her collarbone, a strange, circular symbol that hadn't been there before. Her mind reeled, struggling to piece together what had happened, but her memories were fractured, slipping through her grasp like water. The last thing she could clearly recall was the light, blinding, suffocating, and the figures watching her from the edges of the world. And now, here she was, changed. Evelyn Harper was no longer the same woman who had once sipped tea on her porch, content with the quiet simplicity of her life. Something had been taken from her, or maybe something had been left behind. She sat motionless in the dim glow of the early morning, staring out the window at the empty field beyond. The golden light of dawn stretched across the land, calm, undisturbed. But she knew the truth. It wasn't over. The next time Evelyn woke, she was in her bed. Her first thought wasn't about the light, or the figures, or even the mark on her skin. It was the silence. No humming, no crickets, just the slow, rhythmic ticking of the clock on her wall. She sat up, her muscles stiff, her head heavy. Something felt off. A dull pressure lingered in. Her skull, as if a part of her brain had been tampered with, rearranged. That was when she saw it. A small metallic object sat on her nightstand. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Smooth, reflective, with intricate patterns etched into its surface. Symbols, maybe, a language. She didn't remember bringing it home. Didn't remember much of anything. The last clear memory she had was of the light swallowing her whole, of the figures closing in. Her hands trembled as she reached for the object. It was cool to the touch, unnervingly light. But the moment her fingers made contact, something stirred deep inside her. An almost familiar sensation, like a forgotten dream pressing at the edges of her consciousness. A shiver crawled down her spine. Her life was never the same after that. Visits continued. She stopped trying to fight them. Instead, she started keeping a journal, documenting every light, every hum, every strange sensation that jolted her from sleep. She combed through stories of supposed alien abductions, searching for explanations, for patterns, for something that would make sense of the impossible. And she found them. Other people, scattered across the world, whispering their own stories. The lights, the figures, the marks. For the first time, she wasn't entirely alone, but no amount of research could prepare her for the truth pressing in on her own reality. She tried to tell a friend once. The conversation didn't go well. The polite nods, the uncomfortable laughter, the way their eyes shifted, calculating, trying to decide if she was losing her mind. She knew that look. So she stopped talking, stopped trying to explain. She withdrew further, locking her secrets away, keeping them close, keeping them safe, because the most terrifying part of it all wasn't the lights, or the marks, or even the figures. It was the memories. They surfaced in fragments, slipping into her dreams, vivid and haunting, more real than anything she could rationalize. She saw herself lying on a cold metallic table, bathed in blinding light, felt hands, soft, delicate, gliding over her skin, heard whispers, a language she didn't understand, but somehow recognized. She woke from those dreams gasping, her heart slamming against her ribs, her skin damp with sweat. Evelyn didn't know what they wanted, didn't know why they had chosen her. But as the nights stretched on, as the visits continued, as the line between waking and dreaming blurred, she began to feel something she never expected. Acceptance. Whatever was happening, she couldn't stop it. She could only endure it. And maybe, just maybe one day, she would understand. Charlie Grayson was an ordinary guy with an ordinary job. At 42, he'd spent the better part of 2 decades driving trucks, hauling everything from frozen vegetables to industrial equipment. He didn't mind the solitude of the open road. In fact, he preferred it. Life behind the wheel was simple. Just him, his rig, and the endless stretch of highway. The road was Charlie's refuge, the hum of the engine beneath him, the rhythmic roll of tires on pavement, and the vast open skies. Above, it was his version of freedom. No office politics to navigate, no meetings to attend, and no deadlines beyond the one set by his dispatcher. It was a job that required focus and patience, qualities Charlie had in abundance. He liked the routine of it, the way each delivery started and ended with a clear purpose. Most days, the miles blurred together. The roads were familiar, even comforting. He knew the best diners to stop at for a slice of pie, which truck stops had the cleanest showers, and the stretches of highway, where the sunset seemed to last forever. He loved the quiet moments when the world felt like it belonged to him alone. The only sound, the low rumble of his truck, and the occasional whisper of wind through the windows. Charlie never considered himself the adventurous type. He wasn't the kind of guy who went looking for excitement or mystery. In fact, he avoided it whenever possible. His life was a steady rhythm of pickups and drop-offs, punctuated by the occasional call to his sister or a quick stop to visit a friend on the way through town. It was predictable, and he liked it that way. But driving wasn't without its surprises. Over the years, Charlie had seen his share of odd things on the road. A bear wandering too close to the interstate. Strange lights hovering in the distance late at night. Once, a car inexplicably abandoned in the middle of nowhere, its doors wide open as if the occupant had vanished into thin air. None of it rattled him too much. He chalked it up to the quirks of life on the road and kept moving. Still, there was something about the open highway that always felt a little otherworldly. Maybe it was the way the landscape stretched on forever, or the way the stars looked brighter and closer when you were miles from the nearest city. Charlie had spent countless nights parked at rest stops, leaning against the hood of his truck and staring up at the night sky. He liked to imagine the stories those stars might tell if they could talk. Stories of travelers like him, crisscrossing the country in search of something they couldn't quite name. Charlie wasn't a dreamer by nature, but he did have a quiet appreciation for the unknown. He liked the idea that there were still mysteries in the world, things waiting to be discovered just beyond the horizon. But those thoughts were fleeting, passing through his mind like tumbleweeds skittering across the highway. For the most part, he kept his focus on the road ahead, content with the life he'd built and the steady rhythm of his days. He never imagined that one of those roads, the same roads he had traveled countless times, could lead him somewhere he wasn't meant to go, somewhere that would shatter his carefully constructed world of routine and simplicity, somewhere that would make him question everything he thought he knew about the job he'd always considered so ordinary. It started with a routine delivery. His dispatcher called it a special route, which wasn't unusual. These jobs usually meant more pay and tighter deadlines. Charlie didn't ask questions. He wasn't the type to pry. The pickup was at a nondescript warehouse outside of Las Vegas. The cargo was a heavy reinforced crate with no markings. The manifest simply read, "High-value equipment." That wasn't uncommon either. Truck drivers carried plenty of things they weren't meant to ask about. The instructions were precise. Follow a specific route. No detours. Arrive at the drop-off. Point by 2 a.m. The GPS coordinates led deep into the Nevada desert. Charlie didn't think twice. He'd driven through the desert plenty of times, delivering goods to remote military installations. It was all part of the job. The sun was setting as Charlie turned onto a narrow, unmarked road. The desert stretched out in all directions, the horizon glowing in shades of orange and purple. The only signs of life were the occasional jackrabbit, darting across the cracked pavement and the faint hum of his engine echoing in the stillness. His headlights cut through the growing darkness as he followed the route on his GPS. After an hour of driving, he approached a security checkpoint. The road was blocked by a high chain-link fence topped with razor wire. 2 armed guards stood by a small booth, their faces shadowed by the brim of their hats. Charlie rolled down his window, keeping his hands visible on the wheel. He knew the drill. One of the guards stepped forward, a stocky man with sharp eyes that reflected the glow of the truck's headlights. "Name and manifest," the guard said, voice clipped and professional. Charlie handed over the paperwork without a word. The guard scanned it, then nodded to his partner, who disappeared into the booth. There was a long pause. Too long. Charlie shifted in his seat. He'd done plenty of military-adjacent deliveries, but something about this felt different. The insignia on their uniforms was unfamiliar, but their presence made it clear. This was no ordinary delivery. Charlie rolled down his window as one of the guards approached. The man didn't speak, just motioned for Charlie's paperwork. Charlie handed it over, his heart beating a little faster. The guard studied the documents, then nodded and waved him through. The gate creaked open, and Charlie drove on, his curiosity gnawing at him. The road ahead was smooth, eerily pristine compared to the cracked pavement outside the fence. As he continued, the landscape shifted. Large, hangar-like buildings loomed in the distance, their massive forms barely visible in the moonlight. The air felt heavy, charged with something unexplainable that made his skin prickle. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. His GPS pinged again, signaling he had reached the drop-off point. It wasn't what he had expected. There was no industrial depot, no warehouse tucked away in some quiet lot. Instead, a desolate stretch of concrete led to a massive hangar, its steel doors looming like the entrance to a fortress. A single overhead, light flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced across the asphalt. The air felt thicker here, pressing down on him like a weight. Charlie cut the engine, and the unnatural silence that followed made him uneasy. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic hum of distant machinery. He climbed down from the cab, his boots crunching against the ground as he stretched his legs. He glanced around, half expecting someone to approach immediately, but the area was eerily empty. The flickering light above buzzed softly. For a moment, he considered honking the horn to announce his arrival, but something about the atmosphere made him think better of it. Minutes passed. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man in a crisp white lab coat walked toward him, his expression unreadable, his movements precise. Behind him, 2 guards followed, clad in dark uniforms with weapons holstered at their sides. Their presence wasn't casual. They moved with intention, their eyes scanning the area as if they expected trouble. The man in the lab coat stopped a few feet from Charlie and held out a clipboard without a word. His gaze was sharp, but devoid of warmth. Charlie hesitated, then took the clipboard and scanned the document. It was the standard delivery confirmation, but given the strange location and the armed escort, it felt like he was signing away more than just a shipment. "You'll unload the crate and bring it inside," the man instructed. His voice was clipped, efficient. No introduction, no small talk. Charlie simply nodded. This wasn't the kind of place where questions were welcomed. As he moved to the back of his truck, the guards followed closely, their boots echoing against the concrete. He could feel their eyes on him, scrutinizing every move. The crate was large, heavy, reinforced with thick steel edges. It was unmarked, except for a series of stenciled numbers along the side, nothing that gave any hint about its contents. Charlie had hauled plenty of strange cargo before, but something about this one set his nerves on edge. He carefully wheeled the crate down the truck's ramp, using the pallet jack, the metal clanking softly as it touched the ground. The guards remained close, their presence more oppressive than helpful. The man in the lab coat stood by the hangar doors, waiting. Charlie maneuvered the crate forward, the weight of it forcing him to move slowly. As he reached the entrance, the massive doors groaned open, revealing the space inside. The hangar's interior was unlike anything Charlie had ever seen. The air was cool, carrying a faint metallic tang. Overhead, lights bathed everything in a harsh, sterile glow. Rows of strange equipment lined the walls, machines with sleek, futuristic designs that looked more like something out of a sci-fi movie than a government facility. Some of the machines emitted a faint hum, their lights blinking, in complex, unreadable patterns. Others stood silent, but ominous, their purpose entirely alien to him. Charlie pushed the crate into position, but with every step, his unease deepened. The room felt wrong, too clean, too controlled, as if it existed outside of time. Every footstep echoed just a little too long. Every breath seemed swallowed by the vastness of the space. He stole a glance at the nearest machine, a towering structure of black metal and silver tubing. A soft, eerie blue light pulsed across its surface. He had no idea what it did, and something deep inside told him he didn't want to know. The man in the lab coat tapped his pen against the clipboard impatiently. "Here," he said, gesturing to a marked section on the floor. Charlie's eyes flickered around the room, taking in the details with a growing sense of unease. The lab-coated man and the armed guards avoided looking directly at certain pieces of equipment, as if they too were disturbed by what surrounded them. The air itself seemed heavy, thick with an unspoken understanding. This was no ordinary facility. The man in the lab coat gestured toward the back wall. "Right there," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Charlie nodded and carefully set the crate down, securing it as instructed. The guards watched him with an intensity that made his skin prickle, as if they expected him to do something wrong. "That it?" Charlie asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. The sound bounced off the cavernous walls, too loud. The lab-coated man didn't answer. He simply nodded, already fixated on the crate, as though Charlie no longer existed. As Charlie turned to leave, something caught his eye. A large translucent panel mounted on the far wall. It emitted a faint glow, its surface shifting like frosted glass under dim light. Behind it, something moved. It was barely there, a flicker of a shadow, gone almost before he could register it. But it was enough to make him stop in his tracks. "What's behind?" he started, but the words stuck in his throat. One of the guards stepped forward, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. "Time to go," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Charlie's mouth went dry. He nodded quickly, forcing his gaze away from the panel. As he walked back toward his truck, he could feel the guards behind him, their measured steps making it clear he wasn't meant to stray or see too much. Climbing into the cab, Charlie's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the wheel. He started the engine, the familiar rumble offering little comfort. He pulled away from the hangar, but as he glanced at his side mirror, he saw it again. Movement behind the glowing panel. A shadow. Gone in an instant. He told himself it was nothing. A trick of the light. Maybe exhaustion from the long drive. But the feeling wouldn't leave him. It gnawed at him, creeping under his skin like an itch he couldn't scratch. The GPS chimed, instructing him toward the main gate, but his eyes drifted to a narrow, unmarked side road just ahead. It called to him, a whisper in the back of his mind. Before he could stop himself, he jerked the wheel and veered off the designated route. His heart pounded as the truck's tires crunched over gravel. The road twisted through the outskirts of the facility, hidden by low hills and sparse desert brush. The further he went, the more the landscape changed. The buildings here were different, abandoned, lifeless, their dark windows staring like hollow eyes. At first, there were no signs of activity, just silence, the occasional rusted chain link, fence rattling in the wind. Then, little details began to emerge. A faint glimmer of light from a distant structure, fresh tire tracks in the dirt, the silhouette of guards patrolling a perimeter. Charlie's breath quickened, his guts screamed at him to turn back. But the pull of curiosity was stronger. He pressed on. The road widened, leading him deeper into the heart of the facility. He eased the truck into the shadows of a massive hangar, its dark metal walls blending into the night. He killed the engine. Silence swallowed him. Here's the continuation of your rewritten story with added realism, psychological suspense, and character depth while maintaining the original word count. Charlie sat frozen in the cab, his own rapid breathing the only sound he could hear. For a moment he just sat there, the weight of what he was doing pressing down on him. Then, as if compelled by some unseen force, he climbed out. The air here was different, charged, heavy, like the hum of an invisible current. Each step felt deliberate, his boots crunching softly on the gravel as he crept toward the hangar. A faint glow seeped through a narrow gap between the massive doors. It pulled at him, irresistible. He crouched low, the cool metal of the hangar brushing against his fingertips as he leaned in to peer through the gap. Inside, the space stretched impossibly far, swallowing the light in eerie shadows. The temperature was starkly colder than the desert night outside. Rows of futuristic workstations lined the walls, each manned by technicians in pristine white lab coats. They moved with a quiet, almost eerie precision, their faces bathed in the glow of blue monitors. Charlie's breath hitched as his eyes landed on the centerpiece of the hangar. Suspended above the ground, floating as if gravity had lost its hold, was a craft unlike anything he had ever seen. Sleek, smooth, almost organic in its design. The metal shimmered, catching the light in a way that made it look fluid. Strange symbols glowed along its hull, pulsing faintly, as if the ship itself was breathing. The air around it rippled, distorting, shifting, the way heat bends light on asphalt. But this was no mirage. Charlie's hands gripped the doorframe, his knuckles going white. His mind raced to make sense of what he was seeing. This wasn't any military tech he'd ever heard of. This was something else, something not from here. A cold chill ran down his spine. The technicians moved around the craft like surgeons at an operating table, every movement calculated, precise. They were running tests. On what or why? Charlie couldn't begin to guess. Then a sound, a soft hum, mechanical but deep, resonating through the walls of the hangar. It came from the craft itself, a rhythmic vibration that Charlie didn't just hear. He felt it, deep in his chest. It was like standing too close to a massive engine, but smoother, controlled, hypnotic. He was transfixed. Then, step away from the door. The voice was sharp, cutting through the spell. Charlie whipped around, his stomach lurching. 2 guards, weapons drawn. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, beams landing on him like spotlights in an interrogation room. Panic shot through Charlie's veins, white hot and electric. Run! Before he could think, his body obeyed. The shouts of the guards exploded behind him, their boots pounding against the gravel in pursuit. His own footsteps echoed in his ears, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. Every breath burned, but he didn't dare slow down. He reached his truck in a frenzy, yanking open the door. His hands shook as he fumbled with the keys. They were getting closer, shouting, gunmetal glinting in the moonlight. The engine roared to life. Charlie slammed the door, threw the truck into gear, and stomped the gas. The tires spun for half a second before gripping, sending up a cloud of dust as he tore. Down the road, in the rearview mirror, the guards were still running, silhouetted against the distant lights of the hangar. He had to get out, had to get far away. But as he neared the main gate, a blinding light exploded ahead, swallowing the road in white. Charlie squinted against the glare, his foot slamming the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt. The dust settled, and there, blocking the road, a line of black vehicles, waiting. The engines rumbled, low and steady, a warning in their own right. Armed guards emerged from the shadows, their weapons raised, each movement calculated and deliberate. Charlie's breath came in ragged gasps as the realization set in. There was no way out. Slowly, he raised his hands, his pulse hammering so hard it felt like his heart might burst. The guards closed in, their faces unreadable, their voices sharp and commanding. They pulled him from the truck, their hands rough and efficient, snapping cold metal cuffs around his wrists. The bite of steel sent a jolt of finality through him. This was it. As they led him toward one of the blacked-out vehicles, Charlie stole one last glance over his shoulder. The hangar stood dark and silent in the distance, its secrets swallowed once more. But the translucent panel still burned in his mind, an image he knew would haunt him forever. The guards shoved him into the back of the van. The interior was just as cold and unyielding as the cuffs around his wrists. Then, the doors slammed shut. Darkness. The van lurched forward, carrying him deeper into uncertainty. Charlie's mind raced, tangled in unanswered questions and the growing weight of dread. Where were they taking him? What would happen now? All he knew was that he had seen something he was never meant to see, and that knowledge would cost him more than he had ever imagined. Ethan couldn't remember a time in his life when he didn't feel like an outsider. As a kid, he was always the quiet one, the boy who sat in the back of the classroom, lost in a book or staring out the window. He wasn't like the others. His classmates were busy planning their futures, filling their calendars with parties and milestones. But Ethan, he felt an aching sense of absence, like he was standing at the edge of something vast, unknowable. It wasn't fear of the unknown that unsettled him. It was the crushing weight of the ordinary. Life followed a predictable script, and he hated it. So he chased stories instead. Stories of the strange, the unexplained, urban legends, disappearances, things that shouldn't exist, but just might. His favorite was the back rooms. He first read about it on a late-night internet deep dive. A cryptic forum post titled, "If you're not careful, you might slip through the cracks." The back rooms, as described, was a hidden dimension, an infinite, decaying labyrinth of yellowed rooms and flickering fluorescent lights. You didn't enter by choice. You just fell through reality. The thought left a cold weight in his gut. It didn't feel like just a story. It felt like something real. The more he read, the deeper the obsession grew. He scoured forums, analyzed grainy images, and read accounts from people who claimed to have seen it. Most were nonsense, but some descriptions had a frightening consistency. The same sickly yellow walls, the same buzzing lights, the same feeling of being watched. He dreamed about it sometimes, those endless halls stretching before him, the air thick with something unseen, waiting. Eventually, curiosity wasn't enough. He needed to know. So he started pushing limits, sneaking into abandoned buildings, wandering his university halls long after midnight, hoping, no, expecting to find something. Every time he stepped through a door, he held his breath, half convinced he'd blink and find himself somewhere else. Then, on a dull Thursday evening, it happened. Ethan had been at the library for hours, exhaustion pressing behind his eyes. As he stepped into the elevator to head home, he leaned against the wall, letting his eyelids slip shut. A sigh. A brief moment of stillness. Then, jolt. The sudden stop sent a shock through his body. His eyes snapped open. No floor numbers on the panel, no sound of movement. Just silence. Something was wrong. A sickly yellow glow seeped through. The cracks of the elevator doors, not the dim grey light of the parking garage. Something else. His stomach knotted. Slowly, he pressed the open button. The doors groaned apart. His breath hitched. It wasn't the university hallway beyond. It wasn't anywhere he knew, just an empty, desolate room. Stained yellow wallpaper peeling at the edges, damp industrial carpet beneath his feet. And that noise, that horrible, droning hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. His body screamed at him to stay inside. But his feet disobeyed. He stepped forward. The moment his shoes left the elevator, the doors slammed shut behind him. Clang. Ethan spun around. The elevator was gone. Just wall. His pulse thundered in his ears. No! 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 His voice sounded wrong, hollow, like the walls swallowed the sound before it could go anywhere. He pressed a hand to the wallpaper. It was damp, almost, greasy. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. He turned, scanning the space. Endless hallways stretched in every direction, identical and suffocating. He swallowed. Hello? Silence. He started walking. His footsteps were muffled, the carpet swallowing the sound. The monotony was disorienting. No windows, no signs, no changes. Just the same yellow halls, repeating over and over. Was he moving in circles? He wasn't sure anymore. Minutes passed. Hours. His throat was dry. His limbs heavy. A slow, creeping unease coiled in his gut. Then, movement. A flicker of shadow just at the edge of his vision. He stopped. His breath hitched. Hello? He tried again, but his voice cracked. Nothing. Then the shadow moved. It wasn't just a trick of the light. Something, someone, was there. Ethan hesitated, torn between terror and curiosity. His body screamed, "Run!" but his feet carried him forward instead. He turned the corner. Nothing. His heartbeat pounded in his skull. But just as he exhaled, a new sound filled the space. A soft, shuffling scrape, slow, uneven, like something dragging itself across the carpet. The air in the room thickened. Ethan didn't breathe. The sound grew louder, closer. He turned and saw it. Emerging from the dim light was a figure, tall, too tall. Its limbs, too long, too stretched, as if someone had pulled its body like melting wax. Its skin was sickly pale, almost translucent, hollow sockets where eyes should have been. A mouth stretched into a wide, unnatural grin, rows of needle-like, teeth glinting in the buzzing light. Ethan stumbled back. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move. The creature tilted its head as if studying him. Then it took a step forward. The thing loomed over Ethan, tilting its head with that same eerie, unnatural curiosity, like a scientist studying a specimen pinned to a board, a particularly interesting bug. Then it moved. Its steps were slow, deliberate, each motion jagged, like its limbs weren't entirely under its control, joints bent at impossible angles, shifting with grotesque precision. Ethan's breath hitched, his muscles locked. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body refused. He was frozen, his limbs leaden with terror. The thing was only feet away. Now, its towering form blotting out the flickering light above. The air was thick, heavy, pressing against his chest like a weight. His skin prickled, the back of his neck damp with cold sweat. Then, his survival instincts finally took hold. With a desperate jolt, he spun on his heel and ran. The creature followed. That terrible shuffling sound never faltered, never hesitated. A relentless, dragging pursuit, closer than it should have been. Ethan's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs, drowning out everything but the humming of the lights above. He turned blindly, sprinting through identical yellow rooms, dodging corners, hoping, praying that he could shake it. But it was always there, just out of sight, waiting. His legs burned, his lungs screamed. Then, without warning, he stumbled into a different room. This one was big. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, vanishing into murky darkness. The air was thick with the scent of something old, something rotting, just out of reach. And in the center of the room, an armchair, decrepit, sagging, its upholstery torn and discolored. It faced away from him, positioned like someone had been sitting there, waiting. Ethan collapsed against the wall, his body trembling, sucking in deep, burning breaths. His ears strained for the sound of pursuit. Nothing. The creature was gone. Flicker of hope sparked in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, he'd lost it. Then, a voice, soft, raspy, coming from the chair. "Why did you come here?" Ethan's breath caught. His pulse lurched. The voice wasn't loud, but there was something in it. A quiet malice, wrapped in the illusion of calm. He swallowed hard. His mouth was dry. I don't know how I got here." His voice barely worked, the words falling out in a hoarse whisper. The armchair creaked. Something was in it. Something was shifting. Yet, he still couldn't see it. "No one comes here by accident." The voice was almost amused. "You wanted this. You're one of us now." Ethan shook his head, panic surging up his throat. "No, I don't belong here. I didn't mean to come here." The chair creaked again. The weight of something unseen pressed against the space around him. He could feel it watching. The walls. They felt closer now. Leaning in. Listening. The voice spoke again, its tone almost gentle. "You belong here now. The back rooms have chosen you. There is no way out." Ethan's stomach dropped. The weight of those words settled in his chest like ice. He wanted to argue, wanted to scream, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. He was so tired. His mind throbbed, the endless maze, the deafening hum, the impossible geometry of this place. It had drained something from him. His knees buckled. There had to be a way out. There had to be. But deep down, something in him already knew the truth. This place was endless, a labyrinth with no exit. The thing in the chair laughed, a low, quiet chuckle that rattled against the walls, filling the space with something wrong. "Welcome home, Ethan." The lights flickered. Shadows stretched unnaturally, clawing toward him. The hum of the fluorescence seemed to vibrate inside his skull. And then, just like that, he was gone. But he escaped. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Ethan woke up on the floor of the university elevator. The doors were open. A student was staring at him, wide-eyed, as if she had just stepped in and found him unconscious. His body ached. His head pounded. But he was back. For days, he tried to convince himself it had been a nightmare, a trick of the mind, brought on by exhaustion. A hallucination, maybe. He wanted to believe it. But the back rooms had followed him. He saw glimpses of it everywhere, in reflections, in doorways, in the spaces between blinking. Some nights, he'd wake up gasping, convinced he could still hear the buzzing of the fluorescent lights pressing against his skull. At first, he ignored it. Then he started noticing the gaps, the shadows where there shouldn't be any, the doors that didn't lead where they were supposed to, the moments when time felt wrong, too long, too short. The worst part wasn't the paranoia, it was the knowing. Deep down, he wasn't sure he'd really escaped at all, because some nights, as he lay awake in bed, staring at his ceiling, he could still hear it, that soft, slow shuffling, coming closer and closer. Ethan could barely breathe. His pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out even the oppressive hum of the fluorescent lights. He forced himself to stay calm, to think logically, but logic meant nothing here. The back rooms weren't a place bound by reality. He knew that now. His friends had noticed his unease, the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. But how could he explain? How do you tell someone that a dream, no, a nightmare, is clawing at the edges of your waking life? That it's more than just an illusion, that it's something real, something waiting. He tried to push it away, to pretend it would fade with time, but the dreams only grew worse. Each night, he was pulled back, wandering endless hallways, his lungs filling with stale, suffocating air. And always, the creature was there, watching, grinning. Then came the night, when Ethan woke up drenched in sweat, his sheets tangled around him like restraints. The hum of fluorescent lights still echoed in his skull, and for a moment, he swore he could still see the yellowed walls in the darkness of his bedroom. It was just a nightmare. Just a nightmare. But the more he repeated it, the more it felt like a lie. The back rooms weren't just in his dreams anymore. They were bleeding into his reality, and despite the terror, despite the sickening fear that wrapped around his chest like a vice, something inside him burned with an awful curiosity. He needed to know. There was something more lurking in that place, something beyond the endless halls and flickering lights. The thought consumed him, gnawed at him until he could think of little else. By Friday night, his resolve shattered. It didn't feel like a choice anymore. It felt like fate. He found himself standing in the library, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. The clock read a little past midnight. His fingers trembled as he pressed the elevator button, the doors sliding open with an unsettling smoothness. He stepped inside, pressed the ground floor button, and held his breath as the elevator began to descend. This is foolish. It's not real. The doors opened. The university lobby stretched before him, unchanged, ordinary. Ethan let out a breathy, nervous laugh. He had been ridiculous. Of course, it wasn't real. His paranoia had gotten the best of him. He stepped out, rubbing his tired eyes, and then he noticed it. The walls, a shade too yellow. The lights, just a little too dim. The air, thick with an unfamiliar dampness. A creeping dread slid down his spine as he turned back toward the elevator. The doors were still open, but the lobby was gone. In its place was the sickly pale glow of the back rooms. He was back. Nausea clawed at his stomach, but he forced himself to breathe. This time, he wouldn't panic. This time, he would map out his path, keep his wits about him. He had done it once. He could do it again. But something was wrong. The rooms were darker, the smell stronger, like mildew mixed with something metallic, and the buzzing. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It was a grating, jagged sound, rattling inside his skull. The air pressed against him, suffocating. Ethan moved forward, each step careful, deliberate. He took note of every turn, every subtle detail. But the back rooms weren't static. They shifted, rearranged, distorted reality around him. No matter how much he tried to track his path, it was always different. Then, the sound came. Soft, shuffling. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. The creature was here. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs as he quickened his pace, trying to stay ahead of the footsteps that now mirrored his own. A glance over his shoulder sent ice through his veins. A grotesque figure lurked just beyond the dim glow of the lights. Its elongated form moved with a jerky, unnatural grace, shifting between the spaces like a shadow that wasn't bound by physics. Ethan forced himself forward, his mind racing. He needed to find an exit, a loophole, something. But the back rooms had changed. They weren't just an endless maze anymore. They were alive, and they were closing in, been bleeding through the very fabric of reality. His breath hitched in his throat. No, this wasn't right. He had escaped. He had felt the softness of his carpet, the familiar scent of home. But now, the stale artificial stench of the back rooms was creeping in again, suffocating him. A slow, creeping dread coiled around his spine. His body tensed as he turned toward the bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, though he was certain he had closed it. Beyond the crack, there was nothing but darkness. Not the kind that came from a dimly lit hallway, but something deeper, something unnatural. The longer he stared, the more it felt like it was staring back. His fingers twitched at his sides, an involuntary reaction to the overwhelming wrongness pressing in from all directions. He forced himself to move, to prove to himself that he was still in control. Step by step, he approached the door. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs, drowning out everything but the humming of the lights above. He turned blindly, sprinting through identical yellow rooms, dodging corners, hoping, praying that he could shake it. But it was always there, just out of sight, waiting. His legs burned. His lungs screamed. Then, without warning, he stumbled into a different room. This one was big. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, vanishing into murky darkness. The air was thick with the scent of something old, something rotting just out of reach. And in the center of the room, an armchair, decrepit, sagging, its upholstery torn and discolored. It faced away from him, positioned like someone had been, sitting there, waiting. Ethan collapsed against the wall, his body trembling, sucking in deep, burning breaths, his ears strained for the sound of pursuit. Nothing. The creature was gone. A flicker of hope sparked in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, he'd lost it. Then, a voice, soft, raspy, coming from the chair. "Why did you come here?" Ethan's breath caught, his pulse lurched. The voice wasn't loud, but there was something in it, a quiet malice wrapped in the illusion of calm. He swallowed hard. His mouth was dry. I don't know how I got here." His voice barely worked, the words falling out in a hoarse whisper. The armchair creaked. Something was in it. Something was shifting, yet he still couldn't see it. "No one comes here by accident." The voice was almost amused. "You wanted this. You're one of us now." Ethan shook his head, panic surging up his throat. "No, I don't belong here. I didn't mean to come here." The chair creaked again. The weight of something unseen pressed against the space around him. He could feel it watching. The walls, they felt closer now, leaning in, listening. The voice spoke again, its tone almost gentle. "You belong here now. The back rooms have chosen you. There is no way out." Ethan's stomach dropped. The weight of those words settled in his chest like ice. He wanted to argue, wanted to scream, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. He was so tired. His mind throbbed. The endless maze, the deafening hum, the impossible geometry of this place. It had drained something from him. His knees buckled. There had to be a way out. There had to be. But deep down, something in him already knew the truth. This place was endless, a labyrinth with no exit. The thing in the chair laughed, a low, quiet chuckle that rattled against the walls, filling the space with something wrong. "Welcome home, Ethan." The lights flickered. Shadows stretched unnaturally, clawing toward him. The hum of the fluorescence seemed to vibrate inside his skull. And then, just like that, he was gone. But he escaped. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Ethan woke up on the floor of the university elevator. The doors were open. A student was staring at him, wide-eyed, as if she had just stepped in and found him unconscious. His body ached. His head pounded. But he was back. For days, he tried to convince himself it had been a nightmare, a trick of the mind brought on by exhaustion, a hallucination maybe. He wanted to believe it, but the back rooms had followed him. He saw glimpses of it everywhere, in reflections, in doorways, in the spaces between blinking. Some nights, he'd wake up gasping, convinced he could still hear the buzzing of the fluorescent lights pressing against his skull. At first, he ignored it. Then he started noticing the gaps, the shadows where there shouldn't be any, the doors that didn't lead where they were supposed to, the moments when time felt wrong, too long, too short. The worst part wasn't the paranoia. It was the knowing. Deep down, he wasn't sure he'd really escaped at all. Because some nights, as he lay awake in bed, staring at his ceiling, he could still hear it, that soft, slow, shuffling, coming closer and closer. Ethan could barely breathe. His pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out even the oppressive hum of the fluorescent lights. He forced himself to stay calm, to think logically, but logic meant nothing here. The back rooms weren't a place bound by reality. He knew that now. His friends had noticed his unease, the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. But how could he explain? How do you tell someone that a dream, no, a nightmare, is clawing at the edges of your waking life? That it's more than just an illusion, that it's something real, something waiting. He tried to push it away, to pretend it would fade with time. But the dreams only grew worse. Each night, he was pulled back, wandering endless hallways, his lungs filling with stale, suffocating air. And always the creature was there, watching, grinning. Then came the night when Ethan woke up drenched in sweat, his sheets tangled around, him like restraints. The hum of fluorescent lights still echoed in his skull, and for a moment, he swore he could still see the yellowed walls in the darkness of his bedroom. It was just a nightmare, just a nightmare, just a nightmare. But the more he repeated it, the more it felt like a lie. The back rooms weren't just in his dreams anymore. They were bleeding into his reality, and despite the terror, despite the sickening fear that wrapped around his chest, like a vice, something inside him burned with an awful curiosity. He needed to know. There was something more lurking in that place, something beyond the endless halls and flickering lights. The thought consumed him, gnawed at him until he could think of little else. By Friday night, his resolve shattered. It didn't feel like a choice anymore. It felt like fate. He found himself standing in the library, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust. The clock read a little past midnight. His fingers trembled as he pressed the elevator button, the doors sliding open with an unsettling smoothness. He stepped inside, pressed the ground floor button, and held his breath as the elevator began to descend. This is foolish. It's not real. The doors opened. The university lobby stretched before him, unchanged, ordinary. Ethan let out a breathy, nervous laugh. He had been ridiculous. Of course, it wasn't real. His paranoia had gotten the best of him. He stepped out, rubbing his tired eyes, and then he noticed it. The walls, a shade too yellow, the lights, just a little too dim, the air, thick with an unfamiliar dampness. A creeping dread slid down his spine as he turned back toward the elevator. The doors were still open, but the lobby was gone. In its place was the sickly, pale glow of the back rooms. He was back. Nausea clawed at his stomach, but he forced himself to breathe. This time, he wouldn't panic. This time, he would map out his path, keep his wits about him. He had done it once. He could do it again. But something was wrong. The rooms were darker. The smell, stronger. Like mildew mixed with something metallic. And the buzzing, it wasn't just a hum anymore. It was a grating, jagged sound, rattling inside his skull. The air pressed against him, suffocating. Ethan moved forward, each step careful, deliberate. He took note of every turn, every subtle detail. But the back rooms weren't static. They shifted, rearranged, distorted reality around him. No matter how much he tried to track his path, it was always different. Then the sound came, soft, shuffling. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. The creature was here. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs as he quickened his pace, trying to stay ahead of the footsteps that now mirrored his own. A glance over his shoulder sent ice through his veins. A grotesque figure lurked just beyond the dim glow of the lights. Its elongated form moved with a jerky, unnatural grace, shifting between the spaces like a shadow that wasn't bound by physics. Ethan forced himself forward, his mind racing. He needed to find an exit, a loophole, something. But the backrooms had changed. They weren't just an endless maze anymore. They were alive, and they were closing in, been bleeding through the very fabric of reality. His breath hitched in his throat. No, this wasn't right. He had escaped. He had felt the softness of his carpet, the familiar scent of home. But now, the stale, artificial stench of the back rooms was creeping in again, suffocating him. A slow, creeping dread coiled around his spine. His body tensed as he turned toward the bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, though he was certain he had closed it. Beyond the crack, there was nothing but darkness. Not the kind that came from a dimly lit hallway, but something deeper, something unnatural. The longer he stared, the more it felt like it was staring back. His fingers twitched at his sides, an involuntary reaction to the overwhelming wrongness pressing in from all directions. He forced himself to move, to prove to himself that he was still in control. Step by step, he approached the door. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs, a rhythm too fast, too erratic. Then, a sound, a shuffling. His breath hitched as something shifted in the shadows beyond the door. He froze. The darkness twisted, something moving within it. Slow, deliberate, patient. A whisper slithered through the silence, brushing against his ears like dry paper against skin. Ethan. His stomach turned to ice. His own name, spoken in a voice that was both familiar and utterly foreign, like a memory of a voice he had long forgotten. He staggered back, bumping into his bed. The hum of the fluorescent lights above intensified, drilling into his skull. His room was transforming before his eyes, the colors fading, the walls stretching, ever so slightly. The floor beneath him no longer felt like carpet, but something softer, wetter. His breaths came in sharp gasps. He squeezed his eyes shut. This had to be a dream. It had to be. Then, the whisper came again, closer this time. You never left. His eyes snapped open, and the door, now fully open, revealed a sight that sent his mind into freefall. A hallway stretched before him, long, endless, and buzzing with the sickly yellow glow of those cursed fluorescent lights. The walls were stained, aged, pulsing as if they were breathing, and at the far end of the hallway stood a figure. It was him, his own face, his own clothes, but wrong. The other. Ethan stood still, unmoving, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His eyes were hollow, dark voids that devoured the light around them. Then he smiled, a slow, skin-stretching grin that didn't belong on any human face. Ethan's body moved before his mind could catch up. He turned, sprinting towards his window, hoping, praying, that escape was still possible. He reached for it, fingers curling around the cold glass. The reflection in the window wasn't his. The other Ethan was right behind him, grinning, reaching, and then everything went dark. The color drained from the walls, fading into that sickly, unnatural yellow. The air thickened, weighed down by the familiar stench of mildew and the sharp metallic tang that clung to his tongue. Ethan's stomach twisted, a slow, dawning sickness creeping through him. His breath hitched. No. A whisper, barely more than a breath. His voice shook, his throat tightening. No. I got out. I got out. But the room didn't care. It had never cared. It continued to shift, warping before his eyes. His bed stretched impossibly long, the carpet beneath his feet rippling like liquid, breaking apart into uneven, endless patches. The door, his only escape, faded, dissolving into the walls until there was nothing left but an unbroken, pulsing expanse of yellow. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights drilled into his skull. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was inside him, vibrating through his bones, tunneling into the marrow. Panic clawed at his throat. He stumbled backward, his foot colliding with something soft, thick. His heart stopped. He knew that texture, knew it too well. Slowly, he turned. Dread curled in his stomach, cold and suffocating. He was standing on the carpet, not the one from his bedroom, not the one he had known all his life. The carpet, the patchy, damp, too thick flooring of the back rooms. He wasn't home. He had never been home, and this time it wasn't going to let him go. The color drained from the walls, fading into that sickly, unnatural yellow. The air thickened, weighed down by the familiar stench of mildew and the sharp metallic tang that clung to his tongue. Ethan's stomach twisted, a slow, dawning sickness creeping through him. His breath hitched. No, a whisper, barely more than a breath. His voice shook, his throat tightening. No. I got out. I got out. But the room didn't care. It had never cared. It continued to shift, warping before his eyes. His bed stretched impossibly long, the carpet beneath his feet rippling like liquid, breaking apart into uneven, endless patches. The door, his only escape, faded, dissolving into the walls until there was nothing left but an unbroken, pulsing expanse of yellow. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights drilled into his skull. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was inside him, vibrating through his bones, tunneling into the marrow. Panic clawed at his throat. He stumbled backward, his foot colliding with something soft, thick. His heart stopped. He knew that texture, knew it too well. Slowly, he turned. Dread curled in his stomach, cold and suffocating. He was standing on the carpet, not the one from his bedroom, not the one he had known all his life. The carpet, the patchy, damp, too thick flooring of the back rooms. He wasn't home. He had never been home, and this time, it wasn't going to let him go. Sam Ryder lived a quiet life, the kind that most would call uneventful. His days were spent repairing old radios, bringing their static-filled voices back to life, and his nights were filled with the soothing crackle of jazz on one of his many restored devices. It wasn't exciting, but it was his. Routine, familiar, predictable. That was all he ever needed. He liked to say he wasn't just fixing radios. He was restoring voices from the past. Each crackle, each note was a reminder that some things, no matter how much the world changed, could remain timeless. But the past has a way of finding you, even when you aren't looking for it. And for Sam, the quiet life he had so carefully built was about to be shattered in ways he could never have imagined. It started with an old chest carried into his shop by a woman in her late 60s. Her name was Martha Green, and she spoke with the kind of hesitant tremor that hinted at old grief. She told him the chest had belonged to her late father, a former military officer stationed in Roswell during the 1940s. It was a battered thing, its leather straps worn and brass latches tarnished with time. "I found it while cleaning out the attic," she said, brushing dust from its lid. "Probably nothing, but my father always said this chest held his most important papers. I can't bring myself to open it." Sam wasn't sure why she thought an electronics repairman was the right man for the job, but there was something in her eyes, a deep unease, that made him nod. "I'll take a look." After she left, he set the chest on his workbench, the warm glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows. The lock was old, more for show than security. With a firm twist of a screwdriver, it gave way. The lid creaked open, releasing the scent of aged paper and something more, a faint metallic tang, like old machinery long at rest. Inside, a collection of yellow documents, photographs, and a small stack of reel-to-reel tapes lay nestled in, time-worn disarray. He sifted through them carefully. Most were mundane: personnel files, supply logs, handwritten notes detailing the daily routines of an Air Force base. But then he found the folder. Stamped across its cover in bold capital letters were 2 words: Project Aurora, confidential. Sam's pulse quickened as he flipped it open. His eyes scanned the contents. Diagrams of aircraft unlike anything he'd ever seen. Sleek, curved, defying conventional engineering. Technical notes filled with jargon and equations he didn't understand. And then the photos. Grainy black and white. Images of a crash site in the desert. Debris scattered across the sand. Metallic fragments adorned with strange, intricate patterns. One photo showed soldiers gathered around a tarp-covered object, their expressions unreadable. Another captured something half buried in the ground, a silver, egg-shaped craft. But it was the last image that made his breath hitch, a close-up of a small humanoid figure lying on a stretcher. Pale, almost translucent skin, large, almond-shaped, eyes blank and unseeing. Sam's fingers trembled as he set the photograph down. He had heard the stories, the Roswell crash, the rumors of a government cover-up, but he dismissed them as nothing more than urban legend. Yet here it was, real, tangible. His gaze drifted to the reel-to-reel tapes, each labeled with clinical precision. Crash, recovery, debrief, 1947, subject examination. Chill ran through him. If these tapes contained what he thought they might, this wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a revelation. With a deep breath, he set up one of his restored players, threading the first tape through its reels. The machine hummed to life, static crackling through the speakers, before a voice, measured, clipped, filled the room. July 8th, 1947. Recovery operations have been completed, debris secured and... The words faded momentarily, warped with age, before continuing. Calm and clinical. Biological specimen retrieved. Condition: deteriorating but intact. Examination to commence immediately. Clearance level Omega only. Sam's chest tightened. His fingers hovered over the stop button, but he didn't press it. A brief distortion, then another voice came through, sharper, younger, and filled with something raw. Fear. My God, it's not human. I repeat, it is not human. A loud click. Silence. The tape whirred to its end. Sam sat frozen, his mind racing. The weight of what he had just heard settled in his chest, heavy and suffocating. He reached for the folder again, flipping back to the final photograph. The stretcher, the figure, the impossible reality staring back at him, and then a knock at the door. Sam jumped, heart pounding. He turned toward the sound, his breath hitching. The shop was closed. No one ever came by this late. Another knock. Firmer this time. A chill ran through him. He glanced at the chest, the folder, the tapes. 15 minutes. That was all he had been alone with this discovery, and yet someone was already here, Transported to Hangar 18. Biological specimen recovered from the site is currently undergoing examination. Preliminary findings indicate non-terrestrial origin. The voice crackled into static. Sam sat frozen, the weight of the words crushing down on him. Non-terrestrial origin. He rewound the tape, listening again, his brain scrambling to reject what it had just heard. This wasn't some grainy video, or a blurry photograph easily dismissed as a hoax. This was a voice, calm, clinical, a first-hand account from someone who had been there. Someone who had seen something no one was ever supposed to know about. His stomach churned. His hands were clammy. If this chest had been hidden for decades, there had to be a reason. And if he exposed its contents, there was no telling what might happen next. That thought clawed at his mind as he locked up his shop for the night. But sleep never came. His thoughts were too loud, his nerves too frayed. And when dawn finally bled across the sky, he decided he couldn't keep this to himself. Then, the first sign of trouble. Sam arrived at the shop, coffee in one hand, keys in the other, only to stop dead in his tracks. The front door was slightly ajar. The lock broken. His stomach lurched. A cold, electric dread crept over him. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the once cozy space had been ransacked. His meticulously organized workbench was a wreck, tools strewn across the floor, wires yanked from half-finished projects. A shattered desk lamp bled shards of glass across the hardwood. And then his eyes found the chest. It was open, empty. Sam's pulse pounded in his ears as he stumbled toward it, coffee slipping from his fingers. Forgotten, he knelt beside it, hands shaking as he frantically sifted through the mess. The reel-to-reel tapes, the ones that had unearthed a buried truth, were gone. The folder of photographs and diagrams, the evidence, vanished. All that remained were a few stray scraps of paper and the faint acrid scent of, Sam inhaled sharply, cigarette smoke, not his, stale, lingering. Whoever had been here had taken their time, watching, waiting. His breath hitched as he rose to his feet, legs unsteady. He staggered toward the door, heart hammering against his ribs. The street outside looked unchanged, morning light stretching long shadows across cracked pavement. But then, the car, a sleek black sedan, parked across the street. It hadn't been there yesterday. Its windows were tinted, so dark, not even a hint of the interior was visible. The engine idled softly, a low, steady hum that barely registered against the early morning quiet. But Sam heard it, and the sound was deafening. His mouth went dry. He stepped back into the shop, pressing himself against the wall, breath coming in shallow gasps. His mind raced. Someone had been here, had taken the tapes, the folder, and now they were watching. But why had they left the shop intact? Why not take everything? Unless it was a warning. We know. A bead of sweat traced down the side of his face. Slowly, cautiously, he peeled back the curtain, peering outside with trembling fingers. The sedan hadn't moved. It just sat there. A silent predator, the back of the shop, the emergency exit, his best chance to disappear. Sam's eyes darted toward it, his breath shallow. If he was going to make a move, it had to be now. Before, it was too late. The car hadn't moved, but that didn't make it any less menacing. Sam's mind raced, plans forming and unraveling just as quickly. He had no proof now, no evidence, no tapes, nothing but his word. And what was that worth against the kind of people who could make things disappear? The cigarette smoke still lingered in the air, a ghost of the intruder who had stood in this very room, close enough to touch his life, to steal his choices. His palms were damp. He wiped them on his jeans, exhaling sharply. He needed to think, but the weight of that silent car sitting across the street crushed every rational thought beneath it. A step back, His heel met a loose screw. A sharp crunch. Sam flinched, his breath catching. His eyes darted toward the sound, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. But the shop remained still. Too still. The familiar mess of his workspace felt alien, violated. He crouched behind the counter, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. How had it come to this? He wasn't some investigator. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist hunting for the truth. He was just a guy who fixed radios, a man who liked tinkering with relics from the past because the present was too unpredictable, too chaotic. But now the past had reached for him, and it wasn't letting go. For a fleeting second, he considered calling the police. But what would he even say? Someone broke in and stole proof of a decades-old government cover-up. He could already picture their skeptical glances, the half-hearted nods before they dismissed him as another crackpot chasing UFO stories. And worse, what if they did believe him? What if they were in on it? His gaze flickered back to the sedan. His fingers curled into fists. He didn't know what his next move was, but one thing was certain. He wasn't just a man fixing radios anymore. He was a man in the crosshairs of something far bigger, far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The watching over the next few days, the paranoia sank its claws into him. The sedan followed him, everywhere, the grocery store, the post office. Even when he drove out into the desert to clear his head, it remained, a shadow stretching across every moment, every breath. It never got too close, but it was always there. Then, the phone calls started. At first, just silence. Then clicks, static, and then the voice low, measured, devoid of emotion. "You've seen too much." The words slithered through the receiver one night, curling around Sam's spine like ice. Leave it alone. He dropped the phone, stared at it like it might sprout fangs. Coincidence? A prank? No. Deep down, he knew better. Someone knew what he had found, and they wanted to make sure it stayed buried. The plan with nowhere else to turn, Sam reached out to the only person he trusted, Martha Green. She listened in stunned silence as he told her everything. Her hands trembled as she held one of the few photographs he had managed to copy before the break-in. "My father always said he had secrets," she murmured, her voice thick with regret. "But I never imagined this." Together, they formed a plan. Martha had a contact, a journalist in Santa Fe with a reputation for uncovering government scandals. They would pass the evidence along anonymously, let someone else take the risk of exposing the truth. But the closer they got to Santa Fe, the tighter the noose felt. The sedan was still behind them, always a few cars back. A quiet predator. Every mile was a gamble. Every turn a chance for their pursuers to close the gap. By the time they reached the meeting spot, a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the city, Sam's hands were slick with sweat. Inside, in a corner booth, sat the journalist, mid-40s, a worn leather jacket, sharp eyes that seemed to cut through the dim light. Sam slid into the booth, heart hammering. He reached into his coat, fingers closing around the envelope of copied photos and notes. This was it, his last chance, to get the truth out. He handed it over. The journalist took a slow, measured breath, his fingers tightening around the envelope before slipping it into his jacket. His jaw tensed. "This is big," he murmured, voice low. Then his gaze locked onto Sam's. "But listen, if they're already watching you, they won't just back off because you handed me this." Sam swallowed hard, his throat like sandpaper. He didn't need the warning. He already felt it, the creeping paranoia that came with knowing too much. Even as he stepped out of the dimly lit diner, the weight of the truth sat heavy on his chest, pressing down like an oncoming storm. The drive back to Albuquerque was hell. Every set of headlights in his rearview mirror, every car that lingered too long in the lane behind him, it all felt like a threat. He kept his grip tight on the wheel, his pulse hammering in his ears. Maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe. But paranoia kept people alive. By the time he reached his apartment, his nerves were frayed raw. He locked the door the second he stepped inside, double-checking it before shutting off the lights. Darkness felt safer somehow. He dropped onto the couch, head in his hands, his mind a tangled mess of fear and resolve. The truth was out there now. It had slipped through their fingers, and no matter what happened next, he had done his part. But as the silence pressed in, one thought refused to leave him. Had he just signed his own death warrant? Ryan Jacobs wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble, it seemed, had a way of finding him. At 32, Ryan lived a quiet, predictable life. As a freelance video editor, he spent his days hunched over his desk, meticulously cutting together wedding videos, corporate ads, and the occasional independent film. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and more importantly, it kept him far away from anything remotely controversial. That was exactly how Ryan liked it, until the rainy afternoon in early November, when everything changed. He sat frozen in his chair, the faint whir of the projector, the only sound in the otherwise silent room. The flickering black and white images on the screen felt both surreal and undeniable. His pulse quickened, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This wasn't just strange footage, it was damning. The camera lingered on the astronauts longer than it should have, capturing moments that felt oddly unguarded. One adjusted his helmet, not with the slow, deliberate movements expected in low gravity, but casually, like he was fixing a costume. Another tapped his foot impatiently as a crew member rushed over to adjust the angle of a prop rock. Ryan's gaze darted to the edges of the screen. Cables, sandbags. The illusion was breaking apart. Then came the voices. Hold the flag higher. It's got to look heroic. Cut the glare on the visor. We need the reflection clearer. And then, almost jokingly, don't forget to kick up the dust. This isn't supposed to look like Earth. Ryan's chest tightened. Each instruction chipped away at his sense of reality, peeling back layers of disbelief to reveal something darker. His eyes scanned the background. Metal scaffolding crisscrossed above the soundstage, the faint glimmer of an exit sign reflected in a glossy panel. A crew member, clearly oblivious to the camera, walked through the set, holding a clipboard, his shadow stretching unnaturally under the harsh studio lights. Then the wide shot appeared. Ryan instinctively leaned forward. The clarity left no room for doubt. The soundstage sprawled before him, a carefully crafted illusion. The lunar surface was too perfect, the craters too deliberate, sculpted rather than naturally formed. And then he saw it. The director's chair. Bold, white letters emblazoned across the back. K. Kubri. Ryan felt his stomach churn. The whispers he'd dismissed for years, the conspiracy theories he'd scoffed at, were they true? Had one of cinema's greatest minds been enlisted to craft the ultimate illusion? His hands trembled as he paused the reel, the final frame frozen on the screen. A crew member leaned casually against the set wall, sipping from a coffee cup while the astronauts rehearsed another take. The sheer mundanity of it was what unsettled Ryan the most. If this footage was real, then one of humanity's greatest achievements was nothing more than an elaborate deception. He rewound the reel, watching certain segments again, searching desperately for any indication that this was a clever hoax. But the more he analysed it, the more genuine it seemed. The imperfections in the film stock, the casual banter, the technical jargon, it all felt too natural, too unscripted. This wasn't an amateur's attempt at discrediting NASA. This was something far more sinister. His mind raced. How had this footage ended up here, in the archives of a small-town historical society? Why hadn't it been destroyed or locked away in a government vault? Was it a mistake? Or had someone deliberately left it as a breadcrumb for someone like him to find? Ryan sat back in his chair, his breath uneven. The hum of the projector filled the silence, an eerie echo in the dimly lit room. He glanced at the other reels still sitting in the box, their cryptic labels staring back at him. One caught his eye. Lunar simulation. Final take. The words seemed to glow under the projector's light, daring him to continue. His hand hovered over the box, hesitation warring with an insatiable curiosity. He knew he should stop, pack everything away, pretend he had never seen it. But he also knew that wasn't an option. Not now. Swallowing hard, Ryan reached for the next reel, his fingers brushing against the cool metal surface as he loaded it into the projector. A single thought repeated in his mind over and over like a mantra. This changes everything. Ryan knew what he had just seen, but admitting it, even to himself, felt like stepping over a line he could never come back from. Was this undeniable proof, or some kind of elaborate hoax? And if it was real, why was it here, forgotten, collecting dust in a small-town archive? His first instinct was to put the reel back in the box, seal it shut, and walk away. He could pretend he hadn't seen it, chalk it up to a bizarre coincidence, or a relic from an old Hollywood production. After all, his job wasn't to investigate, just to digitize and catalogue. But the thought of leaving it behind gnawed at him. This wasn't just another forgotten piece of history. It felt bigger, like a single thread in a tapestry that, if pulled, could unravel everything people thought they knew. The editor in him, the part of his mind drawn to uncovering hidden truths, wrestled with the fear tightening in his chest. What if this was his chance to expose something monumental, to bring the truth into the light, no matter how uncomfortable or dangerous? That thought weighed on him, pressing down like an invisible hand on his shoulders. The thrill of discovery was intoxicating. The terror of it was suffocating. Ryan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk and burying his face in his hands. His mind raced through the implications. If this footage was real, it wasn't just a revelation. It was a bombshell. It meant that one of humanity's most celebrated achievements had been built on a lie, a carefully crafted illusion designed to deceive the world. It called into question not just the moon landing, but the credibility of the institutions behind it. And yet, the sheer magnitude of what it meant only made his next decision harder. What could he even do with this footage? Who would believe him? And what kind of attention would it bring? The idea of stepping into the spotlight, being the one to reveal something so controversial, sent an icy chill down his spine. He didn't want fame. He didn't want notoriety. He just wanted answers. For what felt like hours, he sat there in silence, the reels of film an unmoving presence in the dim room. The faint scent of aged celluloid hung in the air, grounding him in the gravity of the moment. His eyes drifted to the projector, where the film still sat threaded through the machine. In the dim light, it almost seemed to glow. The temptation to watch it again, to analyze every frame for something he might have missed, was overwhelming, but the thought of pressing play filled him with equal parts curiosity and dread. The more he replayed it in his mind, the more questions it raised. And with each question, the unease in his gut grew. What if this footage was never meant to be seen? What if it had been hidden here on purpose? Discarded like a secret too dangerous to keep, but too damning to destroy? The room felt smaller, the shadows stretching longer as the day wore on. Ryan rubbed his temples, his pulse loud in his ears. He knew there was no going back now, not after what he had seen. Ignoring it wasn't an option anymore, no matter how much easier it would be. The truth was sitting right in front of him, waiting for someone to do something with it. And whether he wanted to or not, that someone was him. Over the next few days, Ryan meticulously digitized the reels, cataloging the footage and backing it up onto multiple hard drives. He watched for hours, poring over every detail. Each reel added another layer to the story. Scripts, storyboards, even a brief clip of a man in a NASA uniform speaking about the importance of selling the illusion. Ryan could hardly believe what he was seeing. If this footage was real, it would change everything the world thought it knew about one of humanity's greatest achievements. But as the week went on, Ryan began to notice things. Small things at first, but unsettling. A black SUV parked across the street from his apartment, sitting there for hours on end. Strange clicks on his phone line during calls. His internet connection slowing to a crawl every time he tried to upload the files. At first, he tried to dismiss it as paranoia. He had spent too much time staring at these reels, watching too many conspiracy theories play out in real time. But deep down, he knew better. And then came the first real scare. It was late at night. Ryan sat at his desk, headphones on, reviewing a particularly tense segment of footage, when he felt it. A presence. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. A primal instinct screaming at him. Slowly, he pulled off his headphones, heart hammering as he strained to hear past the hum of his computer. Soft creak echoed through the apartment, like the weight of a foot pressing against an old wooden floor. His blood turned to ice. His eyes darted to the front door. Had he locked it? Ryan froze, his breath hitching as he stared at the damning clip. A moment that shouldn't have been possible. The astronaut, mid-moonwalk, adjusting his helmet with ease, as if gravity had never left his body. It defied everything people had been told, everything history had cemented as truth. The room was silent except for the soft hum of his computer. Then, his screen went black. Ryan yanked off his headphones, his pulse spiking. The power was still on. His computer's fan continued to whir softly, but the screen remained dark, empty, a void swallowing everything. Then, stark white letters appeared, cutting through the darkness like a blade. Stop. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the screen, his mind racing. Was this a warning, a threat? His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but before he could react, the message vanished. The screen flickered. A spinning circle replaced it. His computer was rebooting. When the desktop finally reappeared, his stomach dropped. The file was gone. A cold sweat beaded on his forehead. He scrambled through his folders, checked his backup drives. Nothing. It was as if it had never existed. He barely slept that night. Paranoia took root, growing like a weed, choking every rational thought. He replayed the events over and over. Had someone been watching? Had they been inside his system? And if they had access to his files? What else? Did they know? By morning, the fear had burrowed deep. He stepped outside, bleary-eyed, and froze. The black SUV was back. It sat at the corner of his street, engine idling, windows tinted like lifeless eyes staring right at him. This time, Ryan knew. It wasn't a coincidence. He needed to act. Heart pounding, he copied the footage onto multiple drives, spreading them like insurance. One hidden in his closet, another locked away in a safety deposit box at the bank, a third mailed to a friend in another state with no explanation. Then, he reached out to the only person he could trust. Clara Dawson. She was a journalist with a reputation for exposing uncomfortable truths. A woman who had faced government pushback before and lived to tell the tale. If anyone could help him, it was her. They arranged to meet in a crowded cafe downtown. Safety in numbers. Ryan sat at a back table, his laptop open, fingers drumming anxiously against the surface. When Clara arrived, her usual confidence faltered the moment she saw the footage. Her face paled. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her glasses. "Ryan," she whispered, voice barely above a breath. "Do you know what this means?" His jaw clenched. "If this is real." "It is real," Clara interrupted, her expression grim. "And if it gets out, it has to get out," Ryan cut in. "People deserve to know the truth." But Clara hesitated. She swallowed hard. "You don't understand," she said. "This isn't just a cover-up. If what you're saying is true, the people behind this won't just let it slide." Ryan exhaled sharply, nodding. He had already begun to realize the depth of the abyss he had stepped into. But knowing didn't make it any easier. The days that followed blurred into one long, suffocating nightmare. Clara worked her sources, trying to authenticate the footage. Meanwhile, the pressure around Ryan tightened. His apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen, but everything had been rifled through, as if someone had been searching for something specific. His phone rang constantly. Unknown numbers. Silence. On the other end, the SUV never left. Paranoia turned into an unshakable reality. He barely slept, barely ate. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every glance over his shoulder confirmed what he already knew. They were watching. Even Clara started to worry. "Lay low," she urged. "Let me handle the story." But then, Ryan's worst fear became real. Driving home from Clara's office late one night, he noticed headlights in his rearview mirror. Too close, too persistent. He took a right. The car followed. A left. Still there. He turned onto a side street, heart hammering, hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. They weren't just watching anymore. They were coming for him. Ryan didn't go home that night. Instead, he checked into a rundown motel on the outskirts of town, paying in cash, parking out of sight. He spent the night staring at the door, heart pounding with every shift of the wind, every creak of the building. In his bag, the hard drive. The last, untainted copy of the footage felt like a ticking bomb. By morning, he knew he couldn't keep running. He reached out to Clara, arranging one final meeting at a secure location. He would hand over the footage, let her expose the truth, but when he arrived, she wasn't there. Instead, a note was taped to the inside of the cafe door. "Trust no one. They're watching me too." Ryan's stomach plummeted. He was out of options. Alone. Hunted. Without thinking, he boarded a bus bound for nowhere, a city halfway across the country. The hard drive was sewn into a hidden pocket in his jacket, the last piece of the truth he carried. He didn't know where he was going, or who, if anyone, he could trust. But one thing was certain, this secret was too important to bury. Evan Carter had never been one for conspiracy theories. He'd heard them all, whispers in break rooms, late-night TV rants, and those wild podcasts his friend Jake swore by. But to him, it was all just noise, people seeing patterns in chaos, desperate to make sense of the messiness of life. He didn't have time for that nonsense. So when his flight was unexpectedly rerouted through Denver International Airport, he barely gave it a second thought. It was just another layover, a brief stop before he could finally crash in his own bed. But as his cab rolled up to the airport, something gnawed at him, an unease he couldn't quite place. The first thing that hit him was the Mustang statue, massive, rearing back on its hind legs, its eyes burning an unnatural red. Blucifer, the locals called it. And standing beneath it, Evan understood why. It looked wrong. The glossy blue of its body shimmered under the fading daylight, the crimson stare cutting through him. A weird pressure settled in his chest, a vague tightness like the air was heavier here. "Damn thing's cursed, you know," the cab driver muttered as he popped the trunk. Evan blinked. "What?" "The horse. Killed its artist. Crushed him to death. Heart attack finished him off later." The driver shot him a look, smirking. "Welcome to DIA, man." Evan huffed a laugh, but it felt forced. Shaking it off, he grabbed his suitcase and headed inside. The airport itself was unsettling. The white peaks of the roof loomed overhead, resembling a line of snow-capped mountains. Or maybe something else. Something foreign. A nomadic outpost in the middle of nowhere. The design was intentional, he knew that much. But standing here now, beneath its jagged silhouette, he couldn't help but feel like it was watching him. Inside, the terminal was the usual chaos of travelers rushing to and from gates, voices rising and blending into a dull roar. He checked his watch. 2 hours. Just enough time to grab a coffee and stretch his legs. He wandered without direction, sipping a bitter airport brew, letting his feet carry him. That's when he saw them. The murals. Bright, sprawling images that swallowed entire walls. their chaotic colors and surreal depictions stopping him in his tracks. One mural in particular made his stomach twist. It showed fires raging, soldiers in gas masks, children weeping beneath a darkened sky. And yet, just feet away, another mural painted a different picture. Vivid rainbows arching over smiling faces, hands reaching out in unity. The contrast was jarring. His eyes traced the details. Amid the painted destruction, strange symbols were scattered, subtle, hidden in clouds, carved into distant mountains. Shadows fell in unnatural ways, precise and deliberate. It wasn't just art. It was something else. Strange, isn't it? Evan flinched, turning sharply. An older man stood nearby, mop in hand, his janitor's uniform rumpled but clean. His face was lined, weathered, but his eyes sharp, watchful. "What?" Evan asked, clearing his throat. "The murals," the janitor said, nodding toward the wall. "People think they're just art, but they're messages, warnings even." Evan let out a nervous chuckle. "Warnings? About what?" The janitor shrugged. But there was something deliberate in the way he did it, like he knew more than he was letting on. "Depends on who you ask. Some say they predict the end of the world. Others think they're clues to something bigger, something hidden." "Beneath all this," Evan frowned. "Beneath?" The janitor leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "This place has secrets, kid. You ever hear about the tunnels? They go deep, deeper than anyone talks about. Some say they're for storage. Others think, well," his lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Let's just say this airport isn't what it seems." Evans searched the man's face, trying to gauge if he was serious or just screwing with him. But there was something in his tone, something in the way his gaze lingered, that made Evan hesitate. Before he could respond, the janitor straightened, pushed his cart forward, and whistled a tune that echoed down the vast, hollow corridor. Evan shivered, watching him disappear. He glanced back at the mural, at the patterns hidden in plain sight. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup. Maybe, just maybe, he should have been paying more attention to those conspiracy theories after. "All!" Evan shook his head, telling himself it was just a bit of local lore. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling the janitor had left him with. As he continued walking, he noticed other oddities he hadn't picked up on before. The strange gargoyle sculptures perched near the baggage claim, the way certain hallways seemed to curve subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if guiding him somewhere he didn't intend to go. And then there were the symbols. They were everywhere, etched into the floor tiles, carved into the walls, even woven into the patterns of the carpeting. They weren't immediately noticeable. "Damn thing's cursed, you know," the cab driver muttered as he popped the trunk. Evan blinked. "What?" "The horse killed its artist, crushed him to death. Heart attack finished him off later." The driver shot him a look, smirking. "Welcome to DIA, man." Evan huffed a laugh, but it felt forced. Shaking it off, he grabbed his suitcase and headed inside. The airport itself was unsettling. The white peaks of the roof loomed overhead, resembling a line of snow-capped mountains, or maybe something else, something foreign, a nomadic outpost in the middle of nowhere. The design was intentional, he knew that much. But standing here now, beneath its jagged silhouette, he couldn't help but feel like it was watching him. Inside, the terminal was the usual chaos of travelers rushing to and from gates, voices rising and blending into a dull roar. He checked his watch. 2 hours. Just enough time to grab a coffee and stretch his legs. He wandered without direction, sipping a bitter airport brew, letting his feet carry him. That's when he saw them. The murals. Bright, sprawling images that swallowed entire walls. Their chaotic colors and surreal depictions stopping him in his tracks. One mural in particular made his stomach twist. It showed fires raging, soldiers in gas masks, children weeping beneath a darkened sky. And yet, just feet away, another mural painted a different picture. Vivid rainbows arching over smiling faces, hands reaching out in unity. The contrast was jarring. His eyes traced the details. Amid the painted destruction, strange symbols were scattered, subtle, hidden in clouds, carved into distant mountains. Shadows fell in unnatural ways, precise and deliberate. It wasn't just art. It was something else. Strange, isn't it? Evan flinched, turning sharply. An older man stood nearby, mop in hand, his janitor's uniform rumpled but clean. His face was lined, weathered, but his eyes sharp, watchful. "What?" Evan asked, clearing his throat. "The murals," the janitor said, nodding toward the wall. "People think they're just art, but they're messages, warnings even." Evan let out a nervous chuckle. "Warnings? About what?" The janitor shrugged, but there was something deliberate in the way he did it, like he knew more than he was letting on. "Depends on who you ask. Some say they predict the end of the world. Others think they're clues to something bigger, something hidden beneath all this." Evan frowned. "Beneath?" The janitor leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "This place has secrets, kid. You ever hear about the tunnels? They go deep, deeper than anyone talks about. Some say they're for storage. Others think, well..." His lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Let's just say this airport isn't what it seems." Evan searched the man's face, trying to gauge if he was serious or just screwing with him. But there was something in his tone, something in the way his gaze lingered that made Evan hesitate. Before he could respond, the janitor straightened, pushed his cart forward, and whistled a tune that echoed down the vast, hollow corridor. Evan shivered, watching him disappear. He glanced back at the mural, at the patterns hidden in plain sight. His fingers tightened around his coffee cup. Maybe, just maybe, he should have been paying more attention to those conspiracy theories after all. Evan shook his head, telling himself it was just a bit of local lore. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling the janitor had left him with. As he continued walking, he noticed other oddities he hadn't picked up on before. The strange gargoyle sculptures perched near the baggage claim, the way certain hallways seemed to curve subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if guiding him somewhere he didn't intend to go. And then there were the symbols. They were everywhere, etched into the floor tiles, carved into the walls, even woven into the patterns of the carpeting. They weren't immediately noticeable, but once he started looking, he couldn't stop seeing them. Some were geometric, others more abstract, but they all seemed to share a common language. One Evan didn't understand, but couldn't ignore. With over an hour left before his flight, Evan found himself wandering deeper into the airport, drawn by a mix of curiosity and unease. The main terminal, with its bustling crowds and steady hum of announcements, faded into the background as he moved into a quieter section. The lighting seemed dimmer here, the polished floors giving way to scuffed tiles that reflected the occasional flicker of a fluorescent bulb. The further he walked, the more the energy of the place shifted. It wasn't just the physical quiet, it was an oppressive stillness, the kind that crawled under his skin and made his instincts prick with unease. At first, he tried to dismiss the feeling, attributing it to nothing more than nerves. He had always been a bit anxious in unfamiliar places, and Denver International Airport was massive, its labyrinthine layout disorienting even for frequent travelers. But as he passed row after row of empty seating areas and darkened kiosks, the sensation grew stronger. It wasn't just that the crowds had thinned out. It was as though this section of the airport had been entirely forgotten. The usual comforting backdrop of distant conversations, rolling suitcases and footsteps was gone, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed against his ears. That's when he saw it. At the end of a dimly lit corridor, tucked between two maintenance doors, was another door, unmarked and slightly ajar. The fluorescent light above it buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow that seemed to draw his eyes like a beacon. Something about the door felt inherently wrong. It didn't belong here, out in the open, yet somehow hidden, as though it were waiting for someone to notice it. Evan stopped a few feet away, his heart pounding in his chest. He hesitated, his logical mind urging him to turn back. This wasn't his business, and it was probably just a service area or a restricted zone. But something about the door gnawed at him, a whisper of a challenge that tugged at his curiosity. His eyes darted to the corners of the hallway. There were no security, cameras, no signs warning him to keep out, and no staff nearby. The area was so still, so utterly devoid of life, that it felt almost unreal. Evan stepped closer, his sneakers squeaking softly against the tiles. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. Beyond it was a narrow stairwell, the kind you might find in a service area or a building's emergency exit. The air here was different, cooler, almost damp, with a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of his throat. A fluorescent light at the top of the stairs flickered intermittently, casting uneven shadows that danced along the walls. His footsteps echoed against the concrete. Evan's unease deepened. Every step felt heavier than the last, his breathing shallow as the dim light at the top of the stairs faded further into the distance. He could hear the faint hum of machinery, a low vibration that seemed to emanate from the very walls, thrumming in his chest like a heartbeat. It was hypnotic in a way, pulling him forward even as every rational part of him screamed to turn back. At the bottom of the stairs, he found himself in a long, sterile hallway. The walls were stark, made of plain concrete and steel, lined with doors that bore no signs or labels. The air was even cooler down here, and the faint hum he'd heard earlier was louder now, a steady thrum that felt alive somehow. Evan glanced over his shoulder, suddenly very aware of how far he had wandered from the terminal above. Evan glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something behind him. But the stairwell was empty. The door, at the top now, a distant memory. He wasn't sure why he kept going. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, each identical section blending into the next. The dim lighting flickered sporadically, creating brief flashes of clarity before plunging everything back into an unsettling gloom. His footsteps sounded unnaturally loud in the confined space, the echoes amplifying with every step. Each time, he passed another unmarked door. His curiosity grew sharper, mingling with a growing sense of dread. Finally, he reached a door that stood out from the rest. It was heavier than the others, its surface marked with intricate symbols etched deeply into the metal. The patterns were strange, almost geometric, and disturbingly familiar. He recognized them from the murals and floor tiles upstairs, symbols he had dismissed as abstract design elements, but now seemed to carry a darker significance. His hand hovered over the handle, his mind racing. He pressed his ear to the cold surface and froze. There were voices on the other side, muffled but distinct. They spoke in low, deliberate tones, the cadence too purposeful to be casual conversation. He couldn't make out the words, but there was an undeniable intensity in their tone, a weight that made him hesitate. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to turn around and pretend he'd never seen this door. But his curiosity had already taken hold, and the pull of whatever lay beyond was too strong to resist. With a deep breath, Evan gripped the handle and turned it. The door was surprisingly smooth, opening with a soft hiss as it swung inward. A dim, sterile light flooded out, bathing the hallway in its glow. What he saw inside froze him in place, his breath catching in his throat. The room was enormous, far larger than he had expected, and filled with rows of monitors mounted on every wall. Each screen displayed something different: maps, blueprints, live surveillance feeds, and lines of coded data scrolling too fast to read. The air was filled with a faint hum, punctuated by the occasional beep of unseen machinery. In the center of the room stood a massive circular table, its surface covered in documents, schematics, and objects he couldn't immediately identify, and then he saw them. A group of people stood around the table, their figures obscured by the dim light, but their presence was unmistakable. They were dressed in dark suits, their movements deliberate, their posture commanding. They spoke to each other in hushed tones, their faces partially turned away. At the head of the table stood a woman, her silhouette sharp and defined. Her hand rested on a thick file marked with the same symbols that adorned the door, her stance radiating authority. Evan's heart hammered in his chest as he tried to process what he was seeing. This wasn't just a hidden room. It was something bigger, something he wasn't meant to find. Before he could fully take it in, one of the figures turned, their gaze snapping toward the door. Evan's blood ran cold as their eyes locked onto his. He knew he had made a mistake that could cost him more than he was prepared to pay. The room was vast, a cavernous space that seemed to stretch further than the walls could contain. Every inch of the surface was covered with monitors, glowing softly in the dim light. They displayed a dizzying array of information, maps marked with pulsing red dots, documents covered in densely packed text, and live surveillance feeds that shifted between locations Evan couldn't recognize. Some screens displayed lines of code scrolling so fast it was impossible to read, while others showed weather patterns, air traffic routes, and satellite images. The sheer volume of data was overwhelming, each screen a piece of a puzzle Evan couldn't begin to comprehend. In the center of the room stood a circular table, its surface illuminated by built-in lights that cast an eerie glow onto the faces of those gathered around it. The people there, at least a dozen of them, spoke in low, urgent tones, their words blending into a murmur that filled the air like static. The men carried an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. Their suits were flawless, every movement precise, as if they were accustomed to making decisions that carried immense weight. Shadows flickered across their faces, obscuring their features, but not their presence. At the head of the long, polished table stood a woman who radiated control. Her back was straight, her posture rigid, and her sharp gaze swept the room with a quiet intensity that made Evan's breath catch. One hand rested on a thick folder, its surface embossed with a geometric pattern he recognized instantly. The same strange design from the murals, the tiled floors above. It wasn't just printed on the cover, it was branded into the material, as if the symbol itself carried a deeper meaning. Her other hand moved subtly as she spoke, fingers barely shifting, but every gesture was deliberate, calculated. She wasn't just in charge. She was the center of it all, the axis around which this entire operation revolved. Evan's pulse thundered in his ears, his thoughts tangled, sluggish, refusing to piece together what he was witnessing. This wasn't just some forgotten maintenance corridor or a storage room tucked away beneath the airport. This was something else, something larger, something that wasn't supposed to exist, a secret world operating just beneath the mundane hum of ordinary travelers above. And he had walked straight into it, his skin prickled with the undeniable sense that he did not belong here. He was an intruder, an unwanted spectator to something he was never meant to see. Then one of the figures around the table moved, a small shift, nothing more than a passing glance, but their gaze landed on Evan, and the air in the room seemed to tighten, like an invisible force pressing down on his chest. A chill clawed up his spine. The weight of that stare held him in place, locking his limbs, squeezing the air from his lungs. Run! The instinct hit hard, a primal scream in the back of his mind, but his body betrayed him. His feet refused to obey. He was trapped in place, suspended between fear and disbelief. Before he could break free, before he could even attempt to step back into the shadows, a firm hand clamped onto his shoulder. The grip was strong, unyielding. He spun, heart slamming, against his ribs, and found himself face to face with two men in black uniforms. Their expressions were blank, their eyes cold and calculating. "You're not supposed to be here." The words were quiet, measured, but left no room for argument. Evan's mouth opened, desperate to force out some kind of excuse, a lie, an apology. anything that might lessen the razor-sharp tension coiling around him, but no sound came. His throat constricted. His pulse roared. The two men exchanged a silent glance. Then, before he could react, he felt the sharp sting of a needle against his neck. The pain was brief, barely noticeable, but a cold rush of adrenaline shot through him, his body instinctively recoiling. He tried to twist away, tried to force his sluggish limbs to move, to fight, but the world around him was already shifting. The room blurred. The table, the figures, the woman with her piercing gaze. They all faded into smears of light and shadow. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him whole was her face. Her eyes, locked onto his, calculating, unreadable, and then nothing. Evan woke with a jolt. The dull hum of an airport terminal rushed in around him, jarring in its normalcy. People moved past him, pulling luggage, checking phones, lost in the rhythm of everyday travel. A loudspeaker crackled with flight announcements. The scent of stale coffee and recycled air filled his nostrils. His head throbbed, a deep ache at the base of his skull. He reached up, fingers brushing the spot where the needle had pierced his skin. But there was nothing. No mark. No evidence that anything had happened. For a long moment, he just sat there, trying to gather the shattered fragments of his memory. The underground room. The woman. The men in black. The needle. The way the world had tilted and blurred. It all felt like a half-formed dream, slipping away the harder he tried to hold on to it. A robotic voice echoed overhead. Flight 237, now boarding at gate 12. His flight. Evan lurched to his feet, his legs unsteady beneath him. He reached for his bag, gripping the worn strap, but as he lifted it, a sudden, inexplicable unease crawled through him. It was lighter. Too light. His fingers fumbled with the zipper, his breath hitching as he tore it open. And then, his stomach dropped. Something was missing. Hastily, his hands trembling, Evan rifled through his bag, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. His stomach clenched. His camera was gone. The one he always carried. The one that had been strapped securely in his bag when he arrived. Gone. So were the spare memory cards he kept in the side pocket. Every piece of evidence, every shred of proof that he might have captured, had been erased. He swallowed hard, his pulse hammering in his ears. As he stepped onto the plane, an unease burrowed deeper into his chest. It wasn't just the missing camera. It was something else. A hollow space in his mind where memories should have been. Fragments of the hidden room beneath the airport surfaced like ghosts. Brief flashes, blurry and slipping through his grasp like grains of sand. The symbols, the monitors, the woman with the piercing eyes. They lingered at the edges of his consciousness, always just out of reach. Evan left Denver that night, but Denver never left him. The strange events festered like a splinter in his mind, impossible to ignore, yet equally impossible to fully grasp. He tried to talk about it. At first, late-night conversations with friends, his voice laced with unease, trying to put into words the feeling that something had been taken from him. But the looks they gave him, the forced nods, the skeptical glances, made him question himself. "You were probably just tired, man," one friend had said. "Sounds like a weird dream," another added. The doubt in their voices, the polite dismissal, made him feel foolish, paranoid. So eventually, he stopped. Bringing it up, he buried it, convinced himself it was easier to let it fade. But it never really did. Every so often, he'd see a news report about Denver International Airport, or a photograph of its jagged, tented roofline would appear in his feed, and that gnawing feeling would return. The symbols, the murals, the hidden room beneath the surface, they haunted him like a dream half remembered, a puzzle with missing pieces. In the years that followed, Evan avoided Denver whenever he could. He routed flights around it, drove extra miles just to bypass it. But no matter how far he stayed from the airport, he could never shake the feeling that he had stumbled onto something vast, something hidden, a secret he was never meant to uncover. And, though he tried to push it from his mind, one thought remained, gnawing at the edges of his sanity. What had he seen beneath the airport that night, and how far would someone go to ensure he never found out?